Chapter 1179. As an elemental demigod, how strong was Ragnaros? Xueqi had a rough estimate in his mind. Although Ragnaros was strong, it was impossible for him to surpass Malorn, who was known as the strongest demigod in the ancient war. According to the data collected in the ancient war, the system elf's estimate was more realistic. As the ruler of the land of fire and an elemental creature that had lived for tens of thousands of years, Ragnaros' strength was undeniable. Unfortunately, he was injured in the War of Sovereigns 25,000 years ago. He was beaten like a dog along with Si, Thun and the other ancient gods. If he was still at his peak, he wouldn't have needed to be summoned by the Black Iron Emperor and hibernate in the human world for hundreds of years. On the other hand, Ragnaros' power was like his flame domain. Although he could absorb power from natural flames endlessly, he didn't get rid of the savagery and chaos in nature. It was like using good steel on a knife's edge. How powerful could a weapon be if it was used indiscriminately? Therefore, although the power of the Fire Demon King seemed to be huge, the purity of the fire element was not high. At the same time, his use of all flame power had not changed in the past 25,000 years. He was still at the lowest level of borrowing, using quantity and brute force to win. This gave Xueqi a chance. No matter how much spiritual power Ragnaros used, how many seas of fire he created, and how many times he attacked Xueqi's spiritual world, Xueqi still, no. For everything. Move. Xueqi pretended to be weak. With the help of the system, he contracted his own spiritual power to the extreme, allowing the opponent's spiritual flames to wreak havoc in their spiritual channels. After the analysis, Xueqi's lips curled into a mysterious arc. In reality, only 1/100th of a second had passed since Xueqi grabbed Lager's core. However, the horn of counterattack had already been sounded. At the moment, in Ragnaros' spiritual domain, every cluster of spiritual energy was filled with chaotic will with heat as the base. These wills followed the simplest rule of exclusion, attacking and eroding any spiritual energy that had nothing to do with flames. If Xueqi had chosen to go head-on against the elemental demigod, Xueqi would probably have been done for in the end, given his mortal spiritual energy capacity and the vast amount of spiritual energy of an elemental demigod. Although mental power could not directly interfere with reality, Xueqi's mind could not withstand the pressure. If it was forcefully distorted, denying himself and his knowledge of the world, Xueqi's final outcome would be mental death. Then his body would turn into an idiotic vegetative state for a moment, finally giving up resistance and being burned to ashes by Ragnaros' flames. However, Xueqi had an even more ingenious, or perhaps shameless, method. Xueqi's mental domain rotated at a high speed, constantly emitting all kinds of sounds that suited a certain Fire Demon King's taste. I am Ragnaros, the king of the world. I swear I will burn this hateful world to ashes. From today onwards, only the color of flames is allowed to exist. The first few sentences were normal, but then came the drama. I declare. This is a horse. Well, an illusion of Ragnaros pointed at a deer. I declare, this is white. Another small logger pointed at a black thing. That's right. The so-called lie would become the truth when repeated 100 times. Xueqi did not regard the will of Ragnaros' entire clone as a whole. Instead, he used the system to forcibly divide the entire will into different areas according to the activity level of the other party's will, and then repeatedly brainwashed each area. The key to everything was Xueqi's last sentence. I declare. The frost element and the fire element are one family. Just like that, Xueqi's will, which had the color of frost as its core, rushed straight in, unobstructed for even a moment. When it rushed into the core area, it forcibly crashed into the will barrier, and after touching Xueqi's will, it was also died. Like a rolling snowball, it kept wrapping all the neutral or traitorous wills around Xueqi's will. Then, it mercilessly collided with the strongest will of Lager. The shattered will of Ragnaros was like sparks flying out of a blacksmith shop, dancing bit by bit, and finally fading away like a meteor. More white snow shone like stardust as it surrounded Xueqi's will, and it looked like it was covered with countless frost shields. The snowball of Xueqi's will became bigger and bigger, constantly rejecting the strongest will of fire, and at the same time, absorbing all the mental power that could be absorbed. The mental power that was replenished was like the overturning of the sea, eliminating all the gullies in front of it. In the end, as Xueqi's will rotated at high speed, all the low-level willpower, and all the willpower that was still blazing, were all excluded as impure. The tens of thousands of spiritual threads that were left in Xueqi's remaining began to proliferate at high speed in the core of the Fire Demon King's magma, and soon turned into billions of spiritual threads again. Countless spiritual threads ground the flames in the core, washing away all the existence that was regarded as impure. Again and again, round and round. Finally, after continuous low-level will of fire was purified and replenished into Xueqi's mind, Xueqi's will became the absolute master in the magma core. In the outside world, Ragnaros's huge body bloomed with the most dazzling light since the start of the battle. Almost everyone thought that the clone of the Fire Demon King was about to self-destruct successfully. At that moment, tears welled up in the eyes of many heroines. Was it fear, regret, resentment, or unwillingness? Only they themselves knew. However, 1 second passed. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. The earth-shattering explosion that they imagined never came. Ragnaros's posture froze. The temperature froze. It was as if even the blossoming light froze. In the end, what sounded was Xueqi's chuckle. But that's it. In response to Xueqi's laughter, the enormous figure that was still 5 stories tall suddenly exploded. It wasn't an explosion, but purely the rise of the last heat when the fire in a furnace was extinguished. With a puff, it expanded a little, and the body that was still emitting high heat just now disappeared without a trace. Only the shockingly huge fire demon warhammer that had lost its master was left, and it crashed into the magma pool. In midair, a young man in a blue and white robe slowly floated down with a smile. Xueqi? Dozens of faces exclaimed in the same pleasant surprise. Yes, Xueqi survived. In a more powerful state. The transcendent waves that were vaguely emanating from his body told everyone that he seemed to be some kind of transcendent being. Chapter 1180. Had Xueqi become a demigod? No. To be precise, he was now the owner of divinity. If one had to explain the difference between before and after he had divinity, it would be that previously, Xueqi had only connected his magic circuit to the surrounding elemental domain almost permanently. He could generate almost unlimited power like a nuclear power plant, or in other words, produce large amounts of magic at high speed. Divinity did not increase the quality and quantity of magic, but it gave Xueqi a higher level of understanding. If the fire magic in this world was described as a pyramid, then it would be impossible to see the top of the tower at a glance. Now that he had the divinity of the famous fire demon king Ragnaros, Xueqi suddenly had a sense of clarity, as if he could see the top of the tower at a glance. Of course, the pyramid was transparent, but it did not mean that there would be no obstacles along the way. Perhaps there would be all kinds of invisible but tangible glass walls blocking the way. Now, Xueqi could firmly believe that as long as he kept moving forward, he would definitely reach the end. This strange sense of anticipation filled Xueqi's whole body. The flames that would have attacked Xueqi, or even hurt Xueqi, were now obediently crawling in front of Xueqi. The fear was accompanied by a sense of docility, and it was hard to imagine that this was the most violent fire element in the world. "Ha ha! Disperse all of you," Xueqi said softly. With just one sentence, the fire elements wandering around the pool of fire seemed to have a human nature, and quietly retreated in understanding. The flames that were wrapped around Xueqi a moment ago flowed away like quicksand between Xueqi's fingers. The high rock layers slowly descended, as if they were just some kind of mechanism that was being restored. The boiling river of lava a moment ago calmed down, and it was as quiet as a stream in the forest in summer. In the pool of fire, a fountain of lava suddenly rose. It was not as hot as others imagined, but instead, it lightly pressed against the sole of Xueqi's foot like the courtiers greeting their king. The lava that was thousands of degrees Celsius quickly solidified, forming a huge ladder in less than 3 seconds for Xueqi to slowly descend. This is. Wujin opened his mouth wide, and his face was filled with undisguised shock. When Xueqi landed on the ground, Luo Ning was the first to greet him. He bowed deeply and said loudly, "Congratulations, Master, for conquering the fire element." He became the master of the Molten Core. Molten Core Conqueror Xueqi? This name was so resounding that it deeply shook the hearts of every expert. This was especially so for William and Magni, who were extremely shocked. As the king of the Stormwind Kingdom, William had to read hundreds of reports about the burning steppes and the scorching land every year after he succeeded the throne. He was afraid that this terrifying neighbor would suddenly become furious and destroy the Stormwind Kingdom's territory. As one of the direct victims of the War of the Three Hammers, the bronze-bearded dwarves led by Magni had been monitoring Ragnaros, their terrifying new neighbor, for hundreds of years. They had not had a single day of peace. The War of the Three Hammers had caused too much damage to the dwarves. The dark iron dwarves had courted death and become slaves. The wild hammer dwarves had also had to give up their ancestral territory because of the collapse of their old nest, Grimbatal, and had to cross the strait to a place as far away as the Eagle Nest Mountain. Hence, the change of ownership of the molten core had a huge impact on them. But the one who valued the molten core more was Duke Hadessus. "Duke Marcus, your promise." Duque smiled and said, "I have always kept my promises, in the past and in the future. Since Ragnaros's clone has been defeated, his soul in the fiery land has also suffered heavy damage. Hence, the molten core should not exist. Otherwise, it will become a breeding ground for him to recover his strength and nourish evil." Duque raised a finger and said, "Within a month, I will personally hand the molten core to Hadesha to destroy." Hadessus bowed and saluted. Duque glanced at the lava pool behind him and gently raised his hand. After a wave of lava, a small island suddenly rose from the originally unfathomable pool, and a path made of rocks floated up. When Duque covered the path with a layer of frost and let the temperature cool down, everyone saw a huge treasure chest the size of a small house in the middle of the island. This is... Every expert felt their breathing quicken. This was the treasure of the Flame Demon King, Ragnaros. Everyone surrounded it. There was no dispute, no scramble. Everyone tacitly lined up on the right, and the small area on the left was for the tribe's men. Duque snapped his fingers, and as if it had a response, the huge chest opened by itself. The dazzling brilliance that suddenly blossomed from inside made everyone exclaim in admiration, "Wow, wow, wow!" Duque was the first to pick out something that looked like an eyeball. Duque smiled at the tribe's side and said, "Eye of Sovras. This thing is a set with the skull of imprisonment of the Windseeker that we obtained earlier. It corresponds to a one-handed divine longsword." Watkin nodded. "Who asked them to be late?" This set had nothing to do with the tribe. Duque then threw the Eye of Sovras to Gavin Rad. "Boss, I love you to death. Come, give me a kiss, just one kiss." The shameless Gavin Rad actually rushed up and made a bear hug and kiss gesture. Duque only said one word to him. "Scram." Then he kicked the guy into the lava to take a bath. "Ah, boss is buying lives." Gavin Rad screamed, but no one cared about him. The female priests all giggled as they watched the guy miserably use the paladin's invincible to roll to the shore in the distance. Duque ignored the clown and looked at the tribe's side. "Actually, there is another divine weapon here." Seeing Duque walk to the side of the island and pat the hammer that was the size of a small house, the tribe's masters immediately understood. "The hammer can shrink?" Watkin asked. "Of course, this hammer is called Hand of Sovras the Balrog Ragnaros. Its essence is actually a collection of the purest fire elements. I can help it become a two-handed hammer. If the tribe wants it, the Alliance can give it to you." As soon as Duque's voice fell, the leader Grom refused immediately. "We don't need anything. Our lives were saved by the Alliance. Even if we have to pay with our lives, we won't even frown." Kane and Watkin nodded. "All right then, we'll just pick some, and the rest will be for you as souvenirs from the Molten Core battle." Chapter 1181. In fact, the division of loot this time was a matter of mutual modesty and necessity. This was because none of the strong men of the major tribes used hammers, let alone two-handed ones. Grom naturally used Bloodhowl. Kane's faith determined that he only used totem poles or rune spears. Wajin used spears, various sticks, or whirling blades. Rexer used double axes. Moreover, the few powerhouses of the tribe had fought in the Battle of Mount Hyjal, and were equipped with even more powerful Mount Hyjal equipment. Finally, the tribe took some individual pieces of equipment as supplements. Wajin kept Shadow Strike, a long-handled weapon that the Paste people called Dung Fork. Rexer got two two-handed axes, Spirit Shredder and Spine Reaper. To the burly Rexer who had ogre blood, a two-handed axe the size of a human was only a one-handed axe. The Alliance still gained the most. Firstly, the Alliance sent more people. Secondly, it was the Alliance who planned to summon the water elemental from Hydraxia. Thirdly, the tribe owed the Alliance a huge favor. Varian and the other two, Sally Whitemane, Master Craftsman Gerben who had not participated in the battle before, and Queen Kalia were the ones who gained the most. They came in with 1 or 2 pieces of epic equipment mixed with a large amount of superior equipment. After fighting the molten core, everyone had a full set of epic equipment. Another person who gained a lot was Magni Bronzebeard. As Xueqi had absorbed Ragnaros' divinity and even temporarily taken over control of the entire molten core, Xueqi could shrink the Balrog hammer to a size that dwarves could use. At the same time, because of its nature as a fire amalgamation, the hammer could also grow slightly with Magni's body when he used Avatar. For someone like Magni, who was known as the #1 warrior in the Alliance and had long learned the warrior skill Titan's Grip, this was definitely the best weapon for someone who could hold 2 two-handed weapons with both hands. According to Magni, if he used more sulfuron iron ingots, obtained from the molten core, this Balrog hammer could be further strengthened, and it could even be upgraded by half a grade. But that was already a story that the dwarves and hammers could not tell. Seeing that everyone had almost divided up Ragnaros' treasures, Xueqi raised his hands high. "Everyone, please listen to me." The noisy crowd quieted down in an instant. Regardless of race, alliance tribe, or water elementals, they all looked at Xueqi, the leader of the allied forces. "Thank you all for your hard work. Once again, we have solved a crisis that could lead to the end of the world." The crowd could not control themselves and burst into cheers. "Long live! Long live the Alliance! Loktar Ogre! Plop plop plop!" Xueqi waited for the excitement from the various races to subside before he continued. "Although I really want to convey the joy of victory to the various races, to the ears of every citizen of every kingdom or clan, I'm sorry, but we still have an evil black dragon above us." When Duke said that, Onyxia blushed, which was a rare sight, but she pretended to be nonchalant. "The war is not over yet. Please note, this is not just for the sake of our allies, but also for the peace of the Alliance and the world. The current Black Dragon King, Nefarian, was never one to settle down. I think in a few days, we will know what trump card he is so proud of. When that time comes, it will be the day when our allied heroes will march towards Blackwing's nest. But before that, please trouble everyone to stay here for a few more days." Xueqi's request was a little strange. The smart guys had already figured out that Xueqi was actually digging a hole again. From the prior analysis, they already knew that the relationship between Nefarian and Ragnaros was not close at all. Even the so-called allied forces from before were actually negotiated between Nefarian and Major Domo Executus behind Logger's back. Nefarian was definitely happy to see the Alliance and Horde attack the molten core. It would be best if both sides suffered losses. However, a great victory for the allied forces was not something Nefarian wanted to see. Unfortunately, the Black Dragon King could not spy on the situation in the molten core, so he could only rely on guesses. It was not an exaggeration to say that the initiative had now fallen into the hands of the allied forces. Since Xueqi asked everyone to rest, everyone was willing to listen. The terrain of the Pool of Fire was too terrible. After a brief discussion, everyone decided to return to the camp where Lucifron was the earliest to rest. This was because the facilities there were the most complete. Before returning, there was a small incident. "Lord Xueqi, please save me. I've already done everything perfectly according to your request. Please take pity on me and let me become your slave. I just need a little bit of fire. Really, just a little bit." The muscles on Xueqi's face were stiff. When everyone was preparing to retreat, this guy who climbed out of the magma was almost cut down by Mograin's sword. He only stopped at the last moment. Of course, Xueqi would rather Mograin's hand be dirty and cut this guy down with one hand. No one would have thought that Major Domo Executus, who had surrendered to the allied forces and became a traitor, was actually still alive. "Why don't you King die? Then I can legitimately shed some crocodile tears for you." It would have been fine if Xueqi had not absorbed the divinity of Ragnaros, but the divinity that Xueqi had absorbed could create a special fire seed that was enough for a fire demon to survive. Well, now the blame was on Xueqi. Xueqi glanced and found that Onyxia was secretly tugging at the corner of his skirt. Of course, she would not care about the life or death of an enemy leader. But that was a guy who had surrendered and then had his remaining value squeezed out of him. That was a different story. Xueqi was willing to bet that if he dared to burn the bridge after crossing it and kill Major Domo, Onyxia might have other ideas later. Xueqi had an inscrutable look on his face as he gently raised his chin. "Hey, you're not dead? Well, a promise is a promise. Since you have done what I asked, I will accept you. From today onwards, you will guard my mage tower for me. Your status in the future will depend on your performance. Xueqi gently flicked his finger, and a very weak thing, almost like the flame of a lighter, flew straight into the middle of Majordomo's eyebrows. But it was this flame that made Majordomo feel relieved. For a fire demon leader, only a fire seed that could be used as the core of the flame was the key to their survival and reproduction. In the past, only Ragnaros could give this thing, but now there was Xueqi. Master Marcus, thank you very much for your gift. Now, I will take you to Ragnaros' secret treasury. Ha! Chapter 1182. There's such a good thing. Not to mention the others, even Dooku was overjoyed. In Xueqi's memory, the molten core was of the highest quality. It was just 2 divine weapons, the wind sword and the Balrog hammer. These 2 items were enough to make warriors, thieves, and paladins go crazy. They had nothing to do with Xueqi, who was the pharaoh. Majordomo's words made Xueqi's eyes light up. The fire demon in front of him was a coward. Perhaps he would not be able to count on his loyalty in the future. But it was undeniable that this guy was a rare talent in management. Oh, he was a freak. He was very smart. He could manage the molten core, which was full of retarded monsters. He could even decisively command the army to attack the Alliance's powerhouses after analyzing the enemy's strength. When Majordomo was an enemy, Duke naturally wanted to kill him as soon as possible. But when he became Xueqi's servant, it was a different story. Xueqi knew very well that Majordomo had offered this treasure that was not recorded in any historical records. Even though he knew that his master was the pharaoh, Xueqi did not have to be polite to this guy who sold out his master for glory. He raised his chin and said, "Lead the way." Majordomo was unexpectedly overjoyed. He kowtowed repeatedly and said, "Thank you, master. Thank you, master." Xueqi was a little embarrassed. Could this be the legendary saying, "If you can't invite a B***tch, you have to kick him away"? After Ragnaros' clone was destroyed, Majordomo had no way out. The violent fire demon king would never let a traitor go. The only one who could protect him was Xueqi, the fire demon king's killer. Xueqi, who had made up his mind, followed Majordomo to the north of the pool of fire under the escort of a large group of heroes. This was the deeper part of the pool of fire. Majordomo chanted an incantation, and the entire boulder melted, revealing a huge slope that led downwards. Torches lit up along the way, and upon closer inspection, one would be shocked to discover that each torch was made from the arm of a fire demon. The slender fingers that were spread out in the air were holding a dazzling ball of flame. Duke could clearly feel that Kalia, who was secretly holding his hand, tensed up for a moment. It seems that the fire demon clan is also having a hard time. Xueqi sighed softly. Majordomo bowed deeply. The fire demon race desires master's mercy. A clan? Hee. Interesting. After walking for less than a kilometer, everyone followed Majortus to a huge fire magic array. Majortus quickly dispelled the magic array and bowed to invite Xueqi in. Xueqi looked around. Although he did not feel that there was any danger, he still left 2/3 of his people outside just in case. This included Ronin, Jaina, and Tyrande. Lilith aside, the 3 Windrunner sisters followed beside Xueqi, looking very excited. Finally, Ragnaros' secret treasury was opened in front of everyone. Like a beautiful virgin who had been captured, no matter how shy and unwilling she was, she had no choice but to kneel in front of Duke and the other thugs and sing her surrender. Almost the instant the treasure vault in the middle of the magic array was opened, a system notification popped up in his vision. Xueqi could not stop laughing. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Xueqi was overjoyed. He was so overjoyed that he even forgot himself and hugged Queen Sylvanas, kissing her passionately. Yo! Sylvanas! Weren't you always complaining that you didn't have a good flying mount? The mount is here. Everyone, don't just stand there. Come and pick. There's only a limited number. What appeared in front of everyone was a large pile of eggs and what looked like sleeping puppies. If these puppies were normal dogs, and these eggs were normal birds, it would be a joke. Every dog here was a small molten hound that could be used as a mount. Every egg here was the famous Milligazer scorching egg. When this thing hatched, it was the famous pure-blood firehawk, second only to the phoenix in terms of popularity. Back then, many elven players fought to the death, whether it was to gather money or farm, just for a chocobo. Chocobos were nothing compared to this eye-catching firehawk. With the pure-blood firehawk, chocobos could be taken to the slaughterhouse and added to the dishes tonight. Come, come, come. Cut your finger and let a drop of blood in it. As long as it remembers your taste and soul, the pure-blood firehawk will never betray you. Duque's onyxia had already made everyone jealous and jealous. All male compatriots knew that onyxia was an incomparably flashy, capable mount. The other conditions were hard to come by, but at least it was eye-catching and could fight. Now, these dozens of firehawk eggs completely satisfied the needs of all the strong people. Everyone present was knowledgeable. When the first person summoned a pure-blood firehawk bathed in flames, everyone knew that it was much better than the griffins and wyverns. The blazing flames were like a gentle breeze. It felt warm, but it wouldn't hurt the owner at all. Grom took off his black iron equipment set and found that the firehawk, which was connected to his soul, wouldn't hurt him either. Apart from the pure-blood firehawk, there were also the smaller molten hounds. This kind of two-headed lava hound, when used as an enemy, had a set of skills that would give experts a headache. Earth Trample, Primordial Despair, Primordial Frenzy, and a total of 8 disgusting skills. After Duque gave them some fire seeds, these small molten hounds still retained some of their skills. Basically, they only had 1 or 2 random skills. Although the molten hound was no match for the original molten hound, its 30-yard radius, high attack power, defense, and vitality made the molten hound mount the best choice for charging through enemy lines. Whether it was the pure-blood firehawk or the molten hound, they didn't need to be fed. Fire and high temperature were their life forms. According to Major Domo, it would be best if they could find lava for them to bathe in. If that wasn't possible, they could make a bonfire for them to roll around in. That would also be their 3 meals a day. Duque did some calculations. Apart from Northrend, there really wasn't any place these 2 mounts couldn't go. If the mount was a small surprise, then the 3 pieces of high-grade equipment that were supposed to only appear in the Land of Fire were a pleasant surprise. But the biggest surprise was a strange ball of fire. Master, as long as you place your divine artifact sword inside, you can quench your divine artifact once again and add additional attributes. Chapter 1183. Duque's eyes narrowed into a straight line. In his retina, the system elf labeled Eternal Fire deeply stimulated Duque's eyes. Eternal Fire, used by a divine blacksmith, it can be used to refine semi-divine and divine weapons. 50% chance of no change, 20% chance of upgrade, 20% chance of mutation, 10% chance of downgrade. Other than Major Domo, Magni and a few others were standing beside Duke. Majne suddenly rushed up, extremely agitated. He shook Duque's body violently, almost shaking Duque to the point that he almost fell apart. Duque, this looks like the legend passed down by us Bronzebeard dwarves, the Eternal Fire, that can forge divine weapons. Can you give this to us Bronzebeard dwarves? Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Majne was like an old hen protecting its chicks. He also came up and stood between Majne and the flame. Wait, this thing is now my lord's, my lord? Duque flicked Majne's forehead with magician's hand, sending the eager fellow flying. Duque was very magnanimous. I promised Hydraxis to drown the molten core anyway. Rather than letting the eternal fire rot in my wizard tower, why not keep it in the furnace castle? Duque could see through the system's analysis. Eternal Fire looked high-end and elegant, and the title of Eternal Fire was quite scary. In reality, the things that came out of the molten core all had the same characteristic. They were useless if they were not replenished from time to time. That's right. An inextinguishable flame. The question was it only useful as a lighter? Mages themselves were the biggest human lighters. Instead of giving it to others, why not generously give it to your own people? The Furnace Castle was a magical city built on top of an active volcano in the snowy mountains. The Bronzebeard dwarves had purposely chosen to build their city in the belly of the mountain where lava flowed endlessly. Since the Alliance had such good relations, giving it to the Bronzebeard dwarves was the best choice. Just as Magni was about to beg, Duque agreed. He was overjoyed. Oh, my dear Duque, you are indeed the best brother of us dwarves forever. Magni jumped up with intercept, opened his stinky mouth and kissed Duque with his prickly beard. Scram, I'm not interested in men. Xueqi tried his best to resist, but the bastard warriors were all bastards with explosive muscle strength. How could a mere pharaoh like Xueqi resist? Help! Can someone save me? Who can help me get rid of this guy? However, no one responded to Xueqi's cry. The guys around him usually called each other brothers, but none of them came to the rescue at the critical moment. Even Xueqi's own woman laughed heartlessly. Damn it! The world was so cold. In the end, Xueqi was trampled, and was kissed on the cheek by that bastard bearded Magni. Humph. I'll just treat it as if I've been licked by some uncute pet. In fact, it was easier than Xueqi had imagined to do the second quenching. When Magni brought out the hand of Savras Ragnaros to forge, those unfavorable chances were completely eliminated. Most of the heroes secretly returned to Stormwind City to rest. Only Xueqi and his women were left to accompany Xueqi. They watched Magni hammer Xueqi's Gandalf from afar as he chatted with Xueqi. The cold ice barrier on Duke's body completely isolated the raging heat. Inside the barrier, it was as though it was two different worlds. Illyria put on a pure white dress, which was rare for her, and walked down the aisle with the hem lifted. This was still the molten core, after all. If she didn't want her dress to be torn by the hot rocks on the ground, she had to walk carefully. Aurelia, who was dressed like a noblewoman, didn't look like the valiant female ranger at all. The scorching light from the lava shone on Aurelia, and the fiery red light almost dyed her dress red. Why are you suddenly in the mood to wear this? Duke laughed. We won't be going against Nefarian for a while anyway. Isn't it good to use this rare free time to dress up? Yes, of course. Xueqi gently hugged the female ranger's soft and supple waist, and let Aurelia sit on his thighs. Xueqi leaned over and took a deep breath of his lover's body fragrance. So fragrant. What? You've been sniffing for more than 10 years. Isn't it enough? When she wasn't fighting, Aurelia was a true noblewoman. At first glance, she looked more like a high elf noble than a ranger. Not enough, not enough. Of course not. I still want to sniff for the rest of my life. Duke deliberately rubbed his chin, which had some stubble on it, on Illyria's smooth white neck, causing the female ranger to pant. Ah, annoying. It's too itchy. Plop plop. Xueqi couldn't help but lick Aurelia again. I'm warning you. I don't want to mess around with you in front of outsiders. Ugh. Xueqi had to suppress the violent thoughts of Xueqi's godly sword. Xueqi, you've changed a little. When I first met you, I always felt that although you had unparalleled foresight and vision, I always felt that you were being chased by something scary. You kept pushing yourself and wouldn't stop for even a moment. Now, I more or less understand some of your worries. The Burning Legion is indeed a very scary existence. However, I feel that you're a little more comfortable now. Xueqi gently interlaced his left hand with Aurelia's right hand. That's because I've foreseen many tragedies. Fortunately, with our efforts, we've avoided many tragedies. That's why the Alliance has the confidence it has today. Xueqi looked around, and every woman who was chatting with their sisters smiled at his gaze. That's right. Without his and everyone else's efforts, many of these women would have died tragically. Aurelia would have disappeared. Sylvanas would have become the forgotten queen. Elucia would have become an undead and wandered around Scholomance. Kalia would have gone into seclusion due to a broken heart. Jaina would have been cursed by the world for selling her father out. In history, the only ones who had a good reputation were probably Kalia, Tyrant, and Sasha. Xueqi. Aurelia suddenly leaned over to Xueqi's ear and whispered in the whisper of the wind. Do you want to consider having a child? Ugh. Xueqi was a little confused. Just then, Magni suddenly shouted, Ha ha ha! It's done! A new godly sword. Chapter 1184. He raised a strange long sword high in the air. It wasn't just Xueqi. Even the knowledgeable Tyrant had never seen such a strange sword before. Before this, Xueqi's Gandalf was a pure holy sword. But now, the sword had obviously mutated. The intense and blazing sparks danced around the sword, and the originally slender sword body became much thicker, turning into a slender spiral shape, looking like a very long nail. But on top of the spiral, there was a circle of holy and a circle of shadow. The two powers appear harmoniously on the sword, and the girls were stunned. This is Aurelia was a little confused.
The elves were sensitive to magic, and the three Windrunner sisters, including her, could clearly feel the light of expelling evil and the extreme pressure from the sword.
I knew it. Tyrant held her face and sighed. It was hard for her not to be reminded of what happened to Duke in the Battle of the Ancients. He pretended to be a Void Lord and ended up getting her into trouble. Magni laughed. Don't look at me like that. I used the soul imprint that Duke left on the sword to expand its potential. That's how it ended up like this. Duque walked forward slowly and held the hilt gently. A warm and familiar feeling came from his palm. His thoughts involuntarily extended from his palm to the sword. Suddenly, the memories of the past surfaced unconsciously. Ever since he transmigrated, he had killed many evil beings. He pierced through Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, stabbed Archimonde, who was climbing the world tree to death, pierced Ragnaros' throat. The ultimate embodiment of all kinds of fatal attacks, like the last hit, was this spiral-shaped blade. A godly sword born for assassination. On the other hand, Duque was never an absolute messenger of light. He had a heart of light, but he didn't mind doing things in the shadows. He did it for the future of Azeroth. There was light. There was darkness. There was no absolute line, and there was no absolute good or evil. This new divine sword was powered by magic, and it was a perfect representation of Duke's characteristics. Magni clapped his hands. Yo, Duque, I can sense that this sword's name should be Song of Light and Darkness. But I don't know if I'm wrong, but I feel that this strange godly sword has a hidden name. But knowing this name should be your privilege as the owner of the sword. Duque's face twitched. The data pouring down from his retina had already told him the truth of the matter. That's right, he knew the name and data of this sword. Do you think that with a master who constantly forsakes his moral integrity, the divine sword would still have such a high-end, elegant, and artistic name like Marcus Song of Light and Darkness? Of course not. The real name of the godly sword is Duque's Integrity. When he saw the first line, Duque wanted to spit blood on the screen. Duque's Integrity, Grade 2 Godly Sword. Growth limit is Grade 9, a godly sword that was split from the legendary top Grade 9 godly sword, Quell Zarum. It was originally a sword of absolute light and absolute kindness. But because the previous owner, Anduin Lothar, had a disagreement, it split into two swords. The main sword inherited by Turalian inherited absolute light and justice. The secondary sword owned by Duque is further transformed according to the will and soul of its owner, Duque. It has become a special godly sword that is completely different from its predecessor. Duque's Integrity. Attack power 1 to 999. Each attack has an additional 220 fire damage. One-handed sword. Soulbound to Duke Marcus. Duque's Integrity. Special effect 1 Demon Slayer. As the owner of the godly sword, you are the most powerful demon killer in the world, the nemesis of evil. You have destroyed billions of evil beings. The weakness of evil is not a secret in front of you. When facing demons and evil creatures, the attack power is increased by 1000%. At the same time, the wielder of the godly sword will be the enemy of all evil. Duque's Integrity. Special effect 2 Enemy of Males. You are the first target of evil masters such as Sargeras, killed Jaden, Arthas, and Illidan. After seeing you, they will easily lose their minds and reveal flaws. When facing the above, not limited to evil masters, the attack power is increased by 300%. Duque's Integrity. Special effect 3 Soul Torture. Light and shadow are your weapons. When your integrity is gone, as the owner of this godly sword, you can increase the effect of shadow magic such as Mind Blast and Spirit Whip by 500%. Duque's Integrity. The magic supply is not complete. If it can absorb more elemental divinity, the power of the godly sword will be greatly increased. Duque held this strange godly sword in his hand and couldn't help but mutter to himself. When he lost his integrity, should he borrow a bow from Aurelia and use the godly sword as a bow and arrow? Wah! What a beautiful sword! Sasha's eyes were like stars. Can I touch it? Kalia asked softly. After getting Duque's approval, she reached out and caressed the body of the sword, which was not very sharp, as if she was touching a piece of art. Ha! Tyrant looked left and right. Even someone as knowledgeable as she had never seen such a special triple elemental godly sword before. Then, the hands of the black dragon mount, who was standing at the side, became itchy.
It reached out and touched the edge of the sword lightly, and was immediately attacked. Ah! Onyxia screamed, and fainted with a hint of happiness amidst the pain. Her entire body twitched slightly, and she knelt on the ground in an extremely indecent position. There was even some white foam coming out of her mouth. She's... Kalia didn't understand at all. Why was she fine when she touched it? But Onyxia collapsed the moment she touched it. Xueqi held his forehead. Idiot! She actually dared to touch the evil Slayer sword before her evilness subsided. She's lucky she's not dead. Don't bother about her. Since he had gained enough benefits from the molten core, the next step was to find a certain black dragon prince to sacrifice. Xueqi didn't expect Nefarian to be more impatient than he had imagined. Almost at the same time that Ragnaros was killed, hundreds of huge dragon beasts appeared in the burning steppes and scorching canyon. These dragon beasts had the shape of a thunderman, but had a dragon's head. They held strange huge scimitars with 2 heads, and they attracted the attention of the Alliance's army the moment they appeared. Blast them! The dwarven commanders of the Alliance did not care at first. In this world, apart from fire-type creatures, there was nothing that couldn't be blown to death by a huge cannon. If there was, then too. That was what the dwarven cannoneers believed, and they acted accordingly. But after the earth-shattering volley of cannons, other than the red dragon beasts that fell, the other dragon beasts didn't stop. They waved their huge weapons and charged towards the Alliance's army without suffering any damage.
Chapter 1185.
What made the dwarf cannoneers even more depressed was that the red draconic beast that seemed to have been killed jumped up and charged even faster than before.
It was even faster than its companions of the other colors. Just as the dwarf commander was about to fire a second round of probing shots, a new order came. Prince Lang has ordered that the enemy has a great damage reduction ability. He orders us to adopt the 4th formation and retreat immediately. Retreat?
And in the 4th formation?
The irascible dwarf commander was furious. But an order was an order. If he was not convinced, he could even punch Bu Lang in the command center.
At least at this moment, he had to carry out the order.
Xueqi had spent 20 years building the Alliance and had long built the Alliance's military discipline into an iron army. Within the scope of a commander, he could freely use his wisdom and command skills, but the general principles must be followed. The dwarf commander waved his hand.
No matter how unwilling he was, the tank soldiers below had no choice but to surround a large number of heavy steam tanks into a long battle line.
Then, they jumped off the tanks themselves and got on the faster and lighter steam-armored vehicles to escape. Not only that, but there were also dwarf engineers and some professionals who quickly set up layers of defensive lines, such as sticky grease, flame belts, and frost traps. Just as the front line was retreating, the commander finally saw the horror of the dragon through the telescope. Their bodies were 3 or 4 stories high, and one could tell that they were extremely powerful. The steam tanks that were nearly 2 stories high were easily overturned by them. The shoddy pig iron railings that were in the way were sliced apart like butter by the huge double-headed crescent blades. What was more terrifying was that these strange dragon beasts were almost invulnerable to water and fire. Scorching flames, extreme frost, mysterious arcana techniques. At the very least, he couldn't find anything that was particularly effective against these guys at first glance. In the command center, Bu Lang Bronzebeard looked at the image of the front line on the magic mirror and shouted, "Damn it! Is this Nefarian's big gift?" Sure enough, Xueqi was right to keep an eye on that guy. Captain Blackaville expressed his concern. "What do we do? The king and the Alliance have not finished the battle in the molten core. We lack the strongest force."
Bu Lang turned his head, stroked his beard, and revealed a mysterious smile. "Captain, do your duty. What you were worrying about was no more yesterday."
What? The entire Northern Front Command Center was filled with an ecstatic atmosphere.
Ha ha ha. I knew they wouldn't let us down.
Long live the Alliance. The dwarves were straightforward and a little noisy.
If it weren't for the fact that they were facing a great enemy, these fellows would probably have immediately taken out the flat metal bottles hidden on their bodies and poured a few mouthfuls of wine into their mouths on the spot.
Dwarves could hide secrets, but only true secrets. For this kind of secret that Bu Lang claimed to keep secret, but was actually no longer a secret, these big-mouthed mid-level commanders easily infected their subordinates with their optimism. What? Defeat? No. We're just making a strategic retreat.
When our king returns with the Balrog's hammer, he can immediately teach these damn draconic beasts a lesson.
What did I just say?
No, I didn't say anything. Humph. With Bu Lang taking the lead, the other commanders all passed on the orders to their superiors with a look that said, "You know what I mean." In the end, even though they were defeated and retreated, the Northern Front Army, with the dwarves as the core, still held their heads high. This scene was reflected to Nefarian, who was puzzled. In just 20 years, the alliance has already grown into such a terrifying behemoth? However, it made sense when he thought about it. When the alliance was at its most desperate, there was a time when the capital of several kingdoms fell. Even during the Undead Scourge, as the leader of the alliance Lordaeron, was once destroyed. However, under the leadership of Xueqi, the alliance rose again and cleared all the evil forces out of Lordaeron in one fell swoop. Even when the veterans of the alliance bragged to each other, they would say that a war between two kingdoms was not a war. After experiencing multiple annihilations and rebirths, the will and tenacity of the alliance's soldiers had been tempered and tempered. In Stormwind City, Xueqi received the news from the front line on the balcony of the Duke's mansion and let out a long sigh.
Am I still too cautious?
Xueqi suddenly smiled bitterly. The alliance is no longer the alliance 20 years ago. The alliance now is definitely more tenacious than you think. I'm even willing to believe that even if our hero squad is wiped out this time, the alliance will not be completely defeated. There will be more heroes born to carry the flag we left behind and carry on the past. Aurelia sat on the carved iron railing of the balcony and swayed as if she was using the railing as a swing. She swayed so much that she was almost parallel to the ground several times. Even so, with her superb balance and unimaginable waist and abdominal strength, she did not fall. Xueqi nodded in response to his lover's consolation.
Yes.
When Magni and Gavin Rad are ready, we'll take the two artifacts and raid Nefarian's nest. Although Magni's Balrog hammer could be used now, it had not been adjusted. After all, it was originally a warhammer used by a fire elemental lord. To adjust it to be used by mortals, it would require a large number of sulfuron iron ingots to modify. Gavin Rad's wind sword was more troublesome. According to the guidance of the ancient soul attached to the skull of imprisonment of the Windseeker, Gavin Rad's legs were about to break. This was because he had to cross half the planet to run to Silithus on the Kalimdor continent. Fortunately, Theramore had a fixed teleportation gate now, or he would have died just by taking the ship. Xueqi, aren't you worried that Nefarian will find out that you're stalling?
Xueqi waved his hand. It's fine.
Although the black dragons love to play tricks, after tricking Nesario and Onyxia, Nefarian will probably give up on this idea. He's very different from the other black dragons. He's the one and only scientific geek among the black dragons.
Scientific geek?
When Xueqi found a way to explain to Aurelia what a scientific geek was, Aurelia smiled beautifully. After she finally finished laughing, Aurelia suddenly turned around. Her long white legs turned around, and her nimble toes tapped on Xueqi's leg. Like a little person walking, her fingers approached Xueqi's abdomen. By the way, Xueqi, it seems like we haven't practiced swordsmanship for a long time.
Are you interested now?
Xueqi raised his head slightly and looked at the Mount Hyjal, which was illegal by both elven and human standards. He then looked at the flexible waist and the long legs that occupied half of his vision, and swallowed his saliva.
Practice. Must practice. Practice to death.
Humph. Aurelia, you're digging your own grave. How dare you face the power of Xueqi's godly sword alone?
Humph. Who's afraid of who?
Aurelia's face was flushed seductively. Chapter 1186.
Yes. Yes.
The sword flashed. The result of the battle was naturally Aurelia's defeat. With the Red Dragon Queen's blessing, Xueqi was in an invincible position. The only problem was when Aurelia would be defeated. Aurelia unexpectedly lasted a long time but was defeated in the end.
I can't.
Spare me, let me go, Aurelia cried.
Hee.
Don't losers let winners do whatever they want? Xueqi smirked.
Don't. Enough.
You don't want me to be afraid when I see you in the future. Aurelia slyly resisted. Xueqi really didn't want Aurelia to develop a phobia of practicing swords. He could only speed up and give her the final blow before hugging her warmly. Aurelia, do you really want a child? Xueqi gently played with her brilliant blonde hair. Yes. But, let's leave it to fate. Aurelia gently rubbed Xueqi's big hand and felt at ease. Speaking of which, it feels wonderful. I used to want to kill every orc and troll. Now I'm a little used to fighting side by side with a strong horde. Xueqi couldn't help but be speechless. After a while he laughed.
If the chief of the horde has always been Thrall and there's enough external pressure, maybe there really is a chance for the Alliance and the horde to unite peacefully. Although Xueqi himself found it hard to believe that day would come, it was still a possibility. Now that they were facing a great enemy, Xueqi didn't mind giving the horde some benefits fairly.
It wasn't like he didn't want to try this.
Even if the Alliance and the horde have such a grudge?
It's not rare. When that day comes, Thrall will make a wise choice.
What if Thrall isn't the chief and the horde hates the Alliance? In this world, in addition to an equal alliance, there's also a relationship called conquest. Xueqi's gaze seemed to have crossed the distant starry sky, through the endless distance and time, and landed on the celestial empire on Earth. In the beginning, the Han people were just a small tribe that guarded a pitiful few hundred square kilometers of land. After a few thousand years, they finally became the great country that they are today.
Did they rely on words?
Stop joking. Conquering by force and assimilating people was a law that had been used throughout the world and even the entire multiverse since ancient times. If the orc tribes had won the first and second great wars at the Dark Portal, then the ones who would shout, "Never be slaves," would be the humans, dwarves, and elves. Now the tribe had no choice but to cross the sea and guard the barren land. This predicament was just a consequence of the failure of the invasion. In the future, whether or not the Alliance would take the initiative to attack the horde would depend on the strength of the Alliance and the horde, as well as who was the boss of the horde.
The key was still the timing.
If the tribe was strong enough, and a strong enemy was about to arrive, starting a war between the Alliance and the tribe at this time was tantamount to digging their own grave. If the Alliance had completely suppressed the horde, and it happened to be in the gap between the two wars in the original history, and if the person in charge of the tribe was no longer Thrall but brainless Roar, then Xueqi would have to give it his all.
Xueqi did not know that at this moment, something big was happening in the tribe.
Grom and the others took advantage of the gap between conquering the Molten Core and attacking Blackwing's nest to return to the tribe. The warriors of the horde always admired the strong. When they found out that Grom and the others had defeated the ancient elemental demigod, the king of fire demons, Ragnaros, they gave Grom and the others an overwhelming amount of praise. Even the death of 3,000 elites was greatly diminished. In Orgrimmar, the orcs all rushed over to see Grom and the other spoils of war, pure-blooded firehawks and small molten hellhounds. Of course, the warriors were more envious of the new epic equipment that Varrock and the others were wearing.
What an amazing achievement!
This is even comparable to the werewolves that our ancestors tamed in the wilderness. The Alliance doesn't look too bad. The Alliance also promised to help us kill the traitor Blackhand. Fierce discussions even appeared among the guards on duty beside Thrall. Thrall suddenly looked back and asked, "Wajin,
what do you think of the current alliance?"
Wajin touched his long fangs. Fair and more generous. It is very different from the alliance you described. Thrall emphasized, "I didn't lie to you."
Wajin nodded. I know.
Even Xueqi himself admitted that during the period when King Tyrrhenas led the alliance made many mistakes and lacked true fairness and justice. Thrall sighed. If the alliance did not make mistakes, the horde would never have a chance to rise. This was what Thrall was most worried about. As long as there are still strong enemies, the alliance will not dare to attack the horde, Wajin reminded euphemistically.
Yes. War is an opportunity.
Peaceful coexistence only existed when the enemy was stronger or when the strength of each other was equal. Once the strength was out of balance, the weaker party would definitely be unlucky. Originally, westward Kalimdor was a good move. Directly avoiding the Eastern Kingdom, the most powerful continent of the Alliance, avoided direct conflict with the Alliance, and could give the horde a broad space to recuperate. As long as fertility and technological development were encouraged, when the new generation of the horde grew up, the horde and the alliance might be able to fight. Unfortunately, the timing was not good. The conflict between the horde and the night elves, coupled with the heavy losses suffered in the Battle of Mount Hyjal, caused the night elves to fall directly to the alliance. Now the night elves' territory in Theramore, one north and one south, clamped down on Agrima, which made the horde very uncomfortable. Thrall said solemnly, Wajin, I would like to introduce you to a very important guest. I am inclined to let him and his race join the Horde. I will summon the chiefs. Wajin got up from his seat. Wait. Don't call Grom and Kane, they are a bit too honest. I want to hear your opinion first. Wajin's eyes were half closed. He suddenly thought of something, but in the end he bowed deeply. As you command, great chief. Surprisingly, Sal did not meet the mysterious guest in the Valley of Heroes. Instead, he took Wajin to a cellar deep under the city of Orgrimmar. Wajin noticed that the guards in the cellar were all Thrall's personal guards. Opening the door and entering the cave, Wajin's heart suddenly beat wildly. Now he knew why. Hello. Chief Wajin, I am the former king of the Elven Kingdom of Kuel Salis, and now the leader of the Forsaken, Anastrian Sunstrider. The appearance of the former Elven King was not particularly surprising, but the existence of the other one was simply shocking. Sorry, if possible, I do not want to meet in this way, but for the future of the Horde, I have accepted my new fate. The one who spoke was the former great chief of the Horde, Orgrim. He was standing in this place with the identity of the Undying. Chapter 1187. Dworkin's face instantly turned pale, and he trembled. You are blaspheming the dead. Sal remained silent in the face of Dworkin's accusation. Anastrian's deathly pale face showed a trace of a strange distortion, which should be a sneer. Blaspheming the dead? Haha. Enough. Anastrian. If you still want you and your bones to join the Horde, then shut up. In the face of the roar of Orgrim, who should theoretically be his subordinate, the former Sun King was angry for a moment, but in the end, he remained silent with an angry expression. Orgrim turned his head, and under the light of the torches, he revealed a pale face that symbolized death. Although I don't know if the Death Knight is an invention of the Horde, but when the Horde suffered heavy losses and was in urgent need of combat power, it was indeed me, as the great chieftain, who accepted many races into the Horde. For example, the Death Knight, the Trolls, these are all products of that time. If the Death Knight is a blasphemy, then this sin shall be borne by me. Sal clenched his fist. He was also in a difficult position. As a living person, as a new shaman who began to believe in the way of nature, Sal instinctively hated the existence of the undead. Although the guy in front of him claimed to be a new species that broke free from the shackles of the Lich King's consciousness, in front of a shaman, it was actually the same thing. Just like how he didn't think there was any difference between the so-called High Elves and Blood Elves. If it was any other messenger, Sal would have directly used Hammer of Destruction to teach him a lesson. But it was Orgrim, his teacher, his guide, his father's good friend, half of his father. Even the Hammer of Destruction in his hand was a gift from Orgrim. Even the Horde's new main city was named after Orgrim. Orgrim's symbolic meaning to the Horde was undoubtedly as great as the sky. It was such an existence that gave up eternal sleep in the kingdom of the undead and stood up again for the future of the Horde. How could Sal refuse this? Dworkin took a deep breath. Of course, he knew all this, which was why his heart was particularly heavy. He turned around and bowed to Sal. This is related to the orcs and even the inheritance of the Horde. I can only ask the great chieftain to consider the consequences of letting the Forsaken join the Horde. It's not just the boundary between life and death, but also external factors. Woken spoke cryptically, but everyone understood that he was referring to the Alliance. That's right, the Alliance seemed to be in great trouble now. The Fire Demon King and the Black Dragon King were rebelling at the same time. However, according to the reports, Xueqi was currently organizing a team of experts to carry out a step-by-step slaughter. The avatar of the Fire Demon King had fallen, and it would take at least a decade for it to come out. Nefarian was the only one left. If Xueqi hadn't killed Nesario and subdued Onyxia, perhaps Thrall would still have hoped for Nefarian's success. The problem was that Xueqi's glorious battle record was just short of being engraved on his forehead with the words Black Dragon's Bane. Moreover, the betrayal of the Black Hand brothers forced Sal to invest more experts and troops. Otherwise, the foundation of the tribe's rule would be shaken. The first attack had already failed. If they wanted to kill the traitors, the Alliance's strength was indispensable. If the Alliance found out that the Forsaken were to join the tribe at this time, who knew what extreme reaction the Alliance would have? One had to know that the Alliance's Sind Dorii Empire regarded Anastrian as a traitor and vowed to destroy the former king. The alliance also had little chance of reconciling with the Forsaken because the new queen of Sind Dorii, Sylvanas, and the other two Windrunners were Duque's women. There was no way to untie this kind of knot. Even if the alliance received the news and suppressed it first, it didn't mean that they wouldn't retaliate afterwards. The alliance's revenge was still not something the tribe could bear. Obviously, Anastrian also knew this, which was why he had such a heavy bargaining chip now. The Sun King saw the hesitation of Sal and Woken. He stepped forward and bowed. The Forsaken do not need the public support of the tribe. In case the alliance attacks our territory, we do not need the tribe's reinforcements. We only need a promise from the Great Chief. In case the tribe is in a desperate situation, please allow the Forsaken to support the tribe. Wah! One-sided support. What a great sentiment. What a weighty weight. Even Sal couldn't help but be moved when he heard it. Only Woken heard something different. Wait. Great Chief. Did they tell you how many tribal chiefs the Forsaken have resurrected? Thrall was still too young. The resurrection of Orgrim was enough to stun him and throw him into a state of confusion. Now that Woken had woken up, Sal suddenly realized that there must have been a considerable number of strong tribal chiefs joining the Forsaken, which was why the leader, Anastrian, made such a huge concession. When Sal turned his head, he saw Orgrim let out a long sigh, and then Anastrian showed a victorious expression. Orgrim. Speak. The former Sun King showed a cunning smile. Samuro, Kilrog, Zulu hid. Yes. That's right. Almost all the tribal chiefs who died in the First and Second Wars, except for Blackhand, were resurrected by Anastrian as undead. Not only that, but he also added an equally heavyweight bargaining chip. In fact, I also found the Twilight Hammer clan. Great Mage Gujar has 2,000 two-headed ogre mages under him. Sal and Woken's eyelids were twitching. Mages! They were the mages that the tribe lacked and needed the most. Especially Woken, as a troll, he knew too well how fragile a troll without the mysterious power was under the destructive power of magic. No matter how brave the warriors of the tribe were, could they resist the overwhelming coverage of cannons and magic? What's more, after a series of wars, the population of the orcs had not yet exceeded 200,000. The entire tribe, including the Taurens, trolls and goblins, only had a mere 500,000 people. This was simply disproportionate to the tens of millions of people and millions of troops of the Alliance. Rather than saying that the Forsaken needed the protection of the tribe, it was better to say that the tribe was more eager for the spellcasters of the Forsaken. In any case, the increase in combat power brought by the Archmages of the Silver Moon Council and the two-headed Ogre Mages was something that the tribe urgently needed. Orgrim walked up to Sal and put one hand on Sal's shoulder. The big hand that used to be hot was now cold and stiff. I am also helpless to leave such a mess to you. But I still hope that the tribe will be an independent tribe, and not a puppet of the Alliance. Now let us be the secret backing of the tribe. If it really doesn't work, then we will fight to the death with the Alliance. Chapter 1188. Krug Skullcracker used to be a brave orc warrior of the Blackrock clan. 20 years ago, he answered the call of the Chief Blackhand and crossed the void from Draenor to Azeroth, participating in the most tragic battles. He personally participated in the most terrible naval battle of Paladin Bay, the Retreat of South Shore, the Battle of Eagle Nest Mountain, the Battle of Longsong Forest, the Battle of Alterac, the Battle of Lordaeron, and the Battle of Blackrock Mountain that left all the orcs depressed. Then, he became a captive. After a series of battles, the Blackrock clan turned from the most glorious orc clan to the most marginalized small clan. Because of the decline in glory of the Blackrock clan, he was maliciously appointed as a slave foreman in the shelter of Gorehold Castle to watch over his compatriots. The position of an orc foreman in the slave camp was definitely not a good one. He was destined to be hated by his own compatriots and threatened by the scheming humans. If you don't do it, I'll kill 10 of your compatriots first and then tell them that it was you who suggested it. He had sacrificed a lot for his compatriots, but they didn't understand or acknowledge him. Krug didn't know how he survived those 15 years. When Thrall liberated the orcs of Gorehold Castle, he also escaped to Orgrimmar with his compatriots. But because he helped humans punish his compatriots, because of this resentment, he had always been ostracized and isolated. At the beginning of the 21st year of the Dark Portal, the Blackhand brothers from the Blackrock clan, Rend and Maim, openly rebelled. Even Varrock Salyafar, a big shot from the Blackhand clan, was affected and reprimanded, let alone a small figure like Krug. After that incident, it was the 8th time he was beaten. When he was young, he could easily beat down 10 of the brats who beat him today. Unfortunately, he wasn't young anymore, and the torture of the decline of the demon's blood had exhausted his vitality and courage. He was angry. He roared. He wasn't satisfied. He wasn't satisfied. But so what? No matter how just a leader was, he couldn't spread his favor to every corner of the tribe. The bullying continued. At this time, a ghost-like female figure found him. When he was asleep, "Krug, do you hate? Are you angry? Don't you want to take revenge on those idiots? If it weren't for your protection, they would have died long ago." "Hate? Of course I hate him," Krug subconsciously replied in a daze. "Now you have a chance. You just need to do this. No. I will not betray my people." "Betrayal? No. This isn't a betrayal. It's just to prevent the Undying, who desecrated the tribe's glory, from extending their evil palms to the tribe and bewitching your great leader, Sal." "I agree. Go, put this thing in these places." All right. In Duke Marcus' residence in Stormwind City, Duque received news of Anastrian's secret visit to Orgrimmar. That's right, it was Duque's Onyxia who had hypnotized and induced Krug's Skullcracker. The Black Dragon Princess failed to set off a rebellion in Stormwind City, but Duque took a fancy to her quality and ability and threw her to the tribe. From the beginning, Duque didn't think that Anastrian would obediently wait for destruction. To some extent, the alliance between the Forsaken and the tribe was more likely to be the trend. That was why Duque had long set up a backup plan. It was just that Onyxia had joined him, which made things more convenient for him. The thing that Duque placed in Orgrimmar was a very ingenious thing. It was a magic tool that Duque named Powerhouse Detection Device. It wouldn't emit any magical waves, but it would record all magical waves like a recorder and transmit signals to a specific channel from time to time. Other than the system elf, no one could analyze these signals. After some analysis, the system elf almost immediately deduced that Anastrian was in Orgrimmar. This was because when the Sun King fell, all of his magical waves, characteristics of his soul, and other data were all recorded. After a comparison, the results were immediately out. The only thing that surprised Duque was the system's judgment. The Death Knight version of Orgrimmar? This news made Duque grit his teeth. The human Onyxia swayed her sexy and charming body as she reminded Duque. Although Master's device is ingenious, the beast men are too clumsy. He placed several detection devices in terrible locations. "Oh, is that so?" Duque smiled as he continued exploring the dragon's cave. "He's just a cover. Anyway, it's better if Thrall finds that thing." "Oh?" Onyxia's black eyes suddenly lit up. She suppressed her senses and pricked up her ears to listen to Duque's next words. "Guess where my real bug is? In the batch of wood you gave to the tribe?" "No." Duque smiled and shook his head. "In the giant wood that Thrall had the Warsong clan spend a lot of effort to secretly harvest from Grey Valley." "All right. I finally understand why I failed before." Onyxia was finally convinced. She thought that her previous schemes were unparalleled in the world. Who would have thought that 10 of her could not compare to one Duque? Of course, the key was the bonus of the Transmigrator. What could give him a greater sense of accomplishment and more trustworthy than stealing something from the hands of his enemy after going through so much trouble? No tribe would have thought that in the main buildings of Orgrimmar, every beam, every main pillar, was sealed with a druid spell. Onyxia suddenly felt her body become hotter. "As expected of my master. Stronger than me in combat. Even his stratagems are superior to mine. Ha ha ha. You are indeed my destined conqueror." While Duque was regularly taming Onyxia with the dragon taming whip, Varrock Salyafar came to find Thrall. "Great Chief, I think you should come and see this." Sar frowned as he looked at the mysterious object that Varrock handed to him. It looked like a small stone, but when it was opened, it turned out to be an extremely delicate object. He called Wajin over. After a while, "Wajin, what do you think?" "Great Chief, first of all, what is the opinion of the Warlocks?" "A very delicate magic eavesdropper. They must have used human magic." Sal narrowed his eyes. "The Alliance?" "That is indeed a reasonable answer," Wajin said thoughtfully. What else do you see?" "No. It's not the Alliance. You see, Although this thing is delicate, there are a lot of meaningless parts. Chapter 1189. Woken continued, although I don't know magic, my people have quite a good understanding of magic. The arrival of the dark spear trolls in the Kalimdor continent was also a new beginning. After suffering enough losses during the Troll Empire, the trolls set foot in the field of magic. After 5 years, there were already many low-grade trolls. Similarly, the trolls were also a good helper in the field of shamans. Woken's words were convincing to Sal. Go on. Yes, Great Chieftain. Woken reminded, I don't know if the Great Chieftain has noticed, but under the impetus of Duke Marcus, the Alliance is showing a model of large-scale production. As long as the number of required exceeds 100, they will use something called molds to reduce the production cost. Sal and Varrock nodded at the same time. They had seen the standard weapons of the Alliance. The Horde also wanted to learn, but it needed a complete industrial system as a foundation. However, the Goblin Princes of Trade were especially stingy. Every time they talked about these matters, they would take small steps back like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. This made Sar a little annoyed. Back to the original point, Woken held up 3 almost identical bugs in his hand. I have reason to believe that there are definitely hundreds of these things in Orgrimmar. But have you noticed that these things are handmade and too complicated? Even in the eyes of a layman like me, many of the parts are just for decoration. I once overheard Duque instructing people to make weapons and said, it's a sin to use 11 parts for a part that can be done with 10 parts. When Woken said this, the answer was already obvious. This was a good thing done by a force that did not have a complete industrial system and wanted to alienate the relationship between the Alliance and the Horde. Bastard! Varrock was furious. Who knew that he would be stopped by Sal's big hand? Don't go, there's no point. And we don't have much choice. If the Horde wanted to pull a relative balance with the Alliance, it was imperative to join a new, magic-oriented force. Sal suddenly understood why Orgrim chose to believe in Gul'dan even though he knew that it was not a good idea to let the Death Knights join the Horde. Because Orgrim had no choice. At that time, the Blackrock clan had already suffered heavy losses. As the Great Chieftain, he had to find more people to make up for the losses. In a sense, this was like drinking poison to quench thirst. Even though he knew that it was probably poisoned, he had no choice but to drink it first in order not to die of thirst. Sal felt that he, the Great Chieftain, was really aggrieved. On the other side, Duque was laughing heartily. Because in Onyxia's eyes, he saw a look that he had never seen before, worship. Ugh, taming a rebellious female black dragon whose brain was full of bad ideas was really a sense of achievement. However, Duque's attention was now attracted by another matter. Boss. It's done. In the middle of the night, Gavin Rad actually came knocking on his door. If Duke had not just finished taming the dragon, he would probably have slapped him into the wall so hard that he wouldn't even be able to pull him out. All right. On the account that the wind sword was the first divine weapon in his life, I'll endure it for now. Of course, there was a more important reason. Nefarian's dragons had already appeared in the territory near Loch Moden. While Duke seemed to be chatting cheerfully with his mount when he had something to do, and when he had nothing to do, the situation north of the Scorching Canyon was getting worse. In order to stop the dragons from invading Loch Moden, Bulang Bronzebeard had no choice but to blow up the huge tunnel at the Stone Dam Trail. The dragons continued to invade Loch Moden through the barren lands and prepared to attack the dwarves' territory. Although Duque had secretly ordered the dwarves to evacuate Loch Moden, which had just recovered a little after World War II, was destroyed by the flames of war. Not only that, but the army of dragons had also begun to advance from the burning steppes to the Reed Ridge Mountains. Without an effective way, the Reed Ridge Mountains would not be able to hold on. The easiest way to stop Nefarian's draconic army was to attack the draconic beasts head-on. This was very troublesome. If Duque's memory was correct, Nefarian had designed a very disgusting characteristic for these dragons. They were basically immune to physical attacks and were also immune to most types of magic. Only certain specific elements could cause them double the damage. If the dragon's weakness was fire, ice or arcane magic, it would be easy to deal with it. After focusing on training mages, the Dalajan had an explosion of talents after rebuilding. However, Nefarian had mixed a large number of dragons with nature magic as their weakness. Dorgod's 3 natures. This was the slogan summed up by many people in the game after they were wiped out. This was because in this era when the Night Elves had just joined the Alliance, the Druids had not developed a strong enough balance magic. At the time when there were no shamans in the Alliance generally lacked nature magic. Xueqi was very clear about how terrifying the dragons were. If he led the army to fight the dragons head-on, they just had to encounter a large number of dragons that even the mages and warlocks could not deal with. If the dragons that even 10 bulls could not hold back launched a crazy attack on the mages, then this day next year would be the day of mourning for the mages in the Alliance.
Xueqi needed an insurance policy.
Gavin Rad, are the materials ready?
Yes,
Gavin Rad said with a pained expression. Even though he was the Supreme General of the Alliance and the Duke of Stormwind, gathering the materials almost cost him his fortune. In the 21st year of the Dark Portal, arcane gold ingot was definitely a rare item, not to mention the need for 100 of them. When Gavin Rad went to Silithus to find a guy called Dimitrian and found out about the list of materials, he was devastated. Fortunately, Duke was rich and generous, so he gave him a hand, and he was able to gather the materials. Of course, to create the wind sword, elemental ingot was needed. The basic material elemental ore was the elemental ore that Xueqi asked Major Domo Executus to cheat from Nefarian before he killed Ragnaros. Elemental ore was not something important to Nefarian. Although he was puzzled by Major Domo's request, in order to maintain this fragile alliance, Nefarian gave it to him. This was why Gavin Rad used arcane gold ingot and elemental ore to create elemental ingot. At daybreak, the strongest of the alliance gathered in the desert of Silithus, quietly waiting for Gavin Rad to summon the Wind Seeker Prince Thunderin.
Chapter 1190. Endless yellow sand and incessant gusts of wind.
Standing on top of a sandstone peak in Silithus, Tyrande, who was standing beside Xueqi, combed her dark blue hair. Even so, she could not stop the wind from blowing her hair like willow branches. The few strands of silver hair in front of her forehead added a mysterious aura to her blue hair. At this time, Gavin Rad came up to Xueqi and wagged his tail. "Boss, if I free the poor Wind Prince, will he reward me with the divine weapon?" Although Xueqi wanted to say yes, he knew what was going to happen next. A lonely and pained soul, imprisoned for 25,000 years. No one knows what will happen during this time. This is why I gathered so many strong people, in case. Feeling the seriousness in Xueqi's voice, Gavin Rad also realized that what was going to happen next might not be as good as he thought. "Oh, all right, if this is my fate, I will accept it." From being frivolous and excited to being serious, Gavin Rad's transition was so skillful. Indeed, even the most unreliable Gavin Rad had matured. Gavin Rad turned around and ran down to prepare. Suddenly, Tyrande secretly held onto Xueqi's hand. "Sorry, Xueqi. I suddenly thought of Illidan." They were both deeply in love, but it seemed like Illidan and Prince Thunderin did not have a good ending. One was imprisoned for 10,000 years, then fell to the path of demons. The other was imprisoned for 25,000 years, and in the end, Tyrande did not dare to continue imagining, afraid that she would recall the past. She had once used herself as a sacrifice and burned herself to be with Duke, but she was shocked to find that the situation had reversed. The darkest evil could very well be the brightest light, and when she finally thought that she could enjoy this legendary happiness, she found that she had no choice but to face a separation of 10,000 years. If not for the busy family affairs, she might have gone crazy. She did not dare to imagine what would happen to Thunderin, who had once loved her deeply.
"Xueqi, hug me,"
Tyrande murmured. This had nothing to do with lust. It was purely a spiritual need. Xueqi conjured an illusion of him and Tyrande, before hugging the priestess who always appeared strong, holy and otherworldly, using his lips to nourish her fragile heart that was like a candle flickering in the wind. After a long while, "Do you feel much better?"
"Yes."
Tyrande nodded. "However, please do not leave us again. I hope you will remember that you are not fighting alone." When Xueqi brought Tyrande down the stairs, he found himself surrounded by a large group of queens. Sylvanas, Kalia, Elucia, Jaina, and Windrunner's eldest and third sisters. Perhaps they had all sorts of thoughts, but it was clear that everyone had the same goal, for the future of the Alliance, and for everyone's future. On the specially selected open plains, the insect-type monsters that were originally wandering here had long been cleared by the professional teams of the Alliance. Within 10 miles, apart from the Alliance's experts, There was no one else. Xueqi nodded at Gavin Rad. When Gavin Rad brought the left and right halves of the skull of the Wind Chaser's imprisonment, and the essence of the Flame King, that he dug out from Ragnaro's doppelganger, he walked in front of the old human Dimitrian who worshipped Prince Thunderin. Dimitrian's tears flowed down his face. This white-haired human fanatic knelt on the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. "Ah, you have found your master's cage. The long-cherished wish of many generations. I have been waiting for this day for a long time. My wish can finally come true. You must free my master. Now, immediately." Dimitrian's ecstasy was a stark contrast to the indifference of the experts around him. Xueqi was a fraud. Xueqi clearly wanted everyone to prepare for a fight. That battle was definitely unavoidable. Especially after the Feather Moon General Chandris secretly told everyone the story of Illidan. No one had any hope for Prince Thunderin. Everyone watched calmly. Dimitrian, this fanatic who worshipped the wind element, chanted an incantation that outsiders did not understand, and easily caused the atmosphere to shake. Bang! It was as if a large bomb exploded less than 3 meters in the sky above Dimitrian. The dust that was stirred up filled the sky, and along with a strong wind, it dispersed like a shockwave. Bang! Another shockwave. If it hit someone's eyes, it would definitely blind them. The people here were all powerful people who could easily shoot down flying arrows at their peak state. Especially the fully armed warriors and paladins standing in the front row. As long as they paid attention to not let the stones hit their eyes, normal flying stones would not be able to hurt them at all. A few thieves and paladins were even more exaggerated. With super high agility and dynamic vision, most of them waved their daggers non-stop, easily knocking away the flying stones and protecting the healers at the back. Xueqi did not activate the ice barrier. He calmly watched the airflow swirling in mid-air, forming a huge half-human figure. Prince Thunderin appeared. He had a body that emitted white light. The lower half of his body was a spinning tornado, and the upper half of his body was a standard human figure. The sturdy armor wrapped around his huge body, and the 4 sharp spikes on his shoulder armor were very eye-catching. 2 layers of overlapping petal-shaped armor protected his shoulders very well, and the silver-white arm armor emitted powerful wind elemental waves. Ah! Without words, the Wind Prince, who was more than 10 stories tall, almost cut his fanatic Dimitrian in half. Clang! A loud sound of metal clashing almost broke the eardrums of the surrounding people. After inheriting Mograine's Ashbringer, Tyrion Fordring used this godly sword that belonged to him for the first time today, and swung it for the first time. The bright golden light and the wind of the Wind Prince, who had been imprisoned for 25,000 years, were evenly matched. In the distance, 2 figures in armor watched this scene. Suddenly, one of them felt sad, and 2 lines of old tears rolled down his face. He murmured, as expected. Handing it over to Tyrion was the right choice. The other person patted his shoulder. Alexandros, we are all old. It is time to pass the burden to the next generation. Until the last moment of the world's destruction, there is no place for us old fellows to appear. Yes, we should learn from Lothar. If we do not take over the position, it will only hinder the growth of the next generation. No one expected that after today, the 2 great marshals of the Alliance, Mograine and Abendis, would hand over their military power at the same time, and go to the logistics department to train new soldiers. The Scarlet Crusade was taken over by Sidon Dathrahan. The military power of Lordaeron was handed over to Tyrion Fordring. Chapter 1191. At that moment, no one knew that the 2 of them had made such a decision. Everyone's attention was still on Prince Thunderin. Looking at the Berserk Wind Prince, Dimitrian was dumbfounded. My lord! Why? No one from the Alliance had the time to answer him. Everyone knew that it was most likely the 25,000 years of imprisonment that made Thunderin the Wind Pursuer lose his mind and sink into madness. The wind elements in the atmosphere had already begun to boil. It was not an exaggeration to call them storm elements. Violent hissing sounds erupted everywhere in the sky. The weather in the sky suddenly changed. The clear sky a moment ago was now occupied by a gloomy storm. Just as the storm elements boiled to their strongest point, accompanied by the faint sound of thunder, Thunderin the Wind Pursuer's figure began to extend infinitely, suddenly occupying almost the entire sky of Silithus. What kind of giant elemental was that? Just his huge body was enough to cover the light of the sun and moon. He himself was a bigger cover than the clouds. It was as if his huge figure could replace the entire atmosphere, shrouding everyone and becoming a terrifying shadow that could not be removed. And just as the storm let out its most terrifying howl, all of Silithus, no matter whether it was animals, plants, mortals, or even some existences that transcended the mortal world, they were all stimulated violently. That was the oppression of the soul. Those that were slightly weaker were already shivering, their faces showing the darkest fear. That came from the memories of their ancestors, deeply imprinted in their genes and the deepest part of their bloodline. That was the most terrifying period of the Dark Empire 25,000 years ago. On the continent of ancient Kalimdor, the ancient gods Sea, Thun and the Wind Elemental Lord attacked each other, leaving behind a terrifying memory. Hey. That's not right. We saved him and he returned our kindness with ingratitude. Why does this guy feel like he's stronger than Ragnaros? Gavin Rad, who was at the front, muttered. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his pauldron from behind. Xueqi. It was Xueqi. No one knew when he had come to the front from the back. He looked up at Prince Thunderin, who was constantly baring his fangs and brandishing his claws, making weird noises, and crazily expanding his body. He suddenly revealed a strange smile. Hey! Did none of you think of giving him a kick? Give him a kick? How? The opponent was a formless wind elemental. Wait. At this moment, everyone finally realized that the source of the wind was the skull of imprisonment of the wind pursuer that someone had placed on the ground as an offering. Xueqi's kick was like a kitchen knife cutting a wire, and it was accompanied by thunder and lightning. It was this kick of the nature attribute that caused the originally perfectly placed skull to become crooked. This kick caused everyone to be extremely shocked because they saw to their astonishment that the boundlessly enormous figure in midair had instantly shrunk by countless times. Prince Thunderin did not fall with a kick like a paperman, but he was obviously affected by some unknown force. Only Ronan and Tyrant noticed something. They had noticed the flash of light. Is this the radiance of divinity? Divinity? Jaina asked. Tyrant nodded. Yes, it seems that Prince Thunderin wanted to spread his will to absorb and purify the elemental energy in the atmosphere, but was stopped by Xueqi. Xueqi raised his head, a mysterious smile on his face. Sunderland. I know you're angry. And very manic. You're eager to vent your anger. But you also have to see who defeated Ragnaros and released you. Roar. An earth-shattering roar and a sword strike was Prince Thunderin's answer. Xueqi frowned. This Prince Thunderin was obviously different from the prince in history. The Wind Prince in history had at least said a few words. Xueqi looked like he was thinking about life. He wasn't afraid of being hacked to death. If Magni with the Firelord's hammer and Theon with the Ashbringer were here, they would have been able to kill Duke. Then they wouldn't have been heroes in the first place. This time, it was Magni who activated Avatar. He swung the Balrog hammer and clashed with Prince Thunderin's wind sword without any fancy moves. Boom! The terrifying aura that was like a volcanic eruption overwhelmed Prince Thunderin. Not only was the prince's wind sword knocked back by the hammer, but his body that was leaning back was also strangely stiff. At this moment, anyone could see the weakness in the prince's seemingly strong and huge body. Everyone couldn't help but think of that legend. The Wind Chaser used to be so powerful, but he was ambushed. Although the Balrog King couldn't completely destroy him, he was split into two and imprisoned. One could only imagine how weak Prince Thunderin was after 25,000 years of torture. Since they couldn't communicate, the result was set. Kill him. Xueqi waved his cloak. He didn't even bother to attack. That's right. Prince Thunderin looked strong, but he was actually weak on the inside. 20,000 years of imprisonment had caused him to degenerate in all aspects, including his rationality. A weakened version of an elemental lord that only had its basic instincts and no special skills left, only knowing how to randomly hack and slash, could only be considered a large target. If they couldn't even deal with this, the Alliance's hero group could just commit suicide by jumping into the river. Xueqi sat at the back and quietly watched the pitiful Prince Thunderin walk into a dead end. Roar! Prince Thunderin was struck by lightning for showing off. Gavin Rad, who thought he could easily get a divine weapon, used his lightning power to strike the prince. The prince was furious. This was because Magni was holding the hand of Savras the Balrog Ragnaros, which had taught him how to be a human, and was now teaching him how to be a human. Ah! The prince was furious again. Ashbringer's blazing holy light reminded him of a group of titans who used this light to teach him how to be a human. Spells and arrows rained down on him like a torrential rain. Weapons filled with fire elements left scars on his frail body again and again. Unsurprisingly, the pitiful Prince Thunderin collapsed not long after he saw the light of day again in just 5 minutes. A large lump of something that looked like dust was the remains of the Wind Prince. In the dust, a small wind sword was especially eye-catching. This is... Gavin Rad was extremely curious. This is Wind's Kiss Blade. Take it and let that fanatic work. Just like in history, Thunder's Fury, blessed sword of the Wind Chaser was finally made. Gavin Rad was so happy that he went around showing it off, until he was shocked to see that Duque was holding an identical wind sword. Chapter 1192. The moment he saw Duque holding the wind sword, Gavin Rad was petrified. A gust of wind blew, and it felt like this guy's soul had already turned into dust and dissipated with the wind. After a long time, Gavin Rad finally opened his mouth and asked, "Boss, let me ask you something. Can artifacts be mass-produced?" Gavin Rad was not an ignorant bumpkin. Of course, he knew that the lightning bow that the Windrunner sisters used was actually a mass-produced product from the Burning Legion. It was just that the quality was too high, and they did not mind using the exact same weapon. In the eyes of most people, a divine artifact should be unique. Although Duque's mouth was wide open enough to fit an egg, he still wanted to tell Gavin Rad, "Idiot, you're still too inexperienced. Let's not talk about the future where everyone could play with illusions and run around with a fake wind sword." Just in the earliest days, Duque had seen with his own eyes the terrifying scene of 40 bandits with a pair of Azanatha's warblades charging at him together in the Great Battle of Oxen in the game. Whoosh whoosh. That was a terrifying scene of being sliced to death like tofu even with plate armor. However, Duque's wind sword was really a special existence. The Wind's Kiss blade that had merged with the last remnant of Prince Thunderin's soul, plus all the materials from before, had been given to Dimitrian to forge the artifact Thunder's Fury. He also saw the blessing, "Hero, I hope you have a love that you will never regret." But Duque realized that after killing Prince Thunderin and infusing most of the prince's power into the wind sword, there was still something left. According to the material strength of the wind sword, the divinity that could be stored inside had already reached saturation, but there was still a lot of divinity left. In a sense, Duque's soul was a hodgepodge container that could hold all kinds of divinity into the sea. So, Duque accepted the extra divinity with a smile. But Duque did not expect that after he absorbed the storm elemental divinity, he was shocked to find that his magic had an independent series in the system. Natural element. Not only that, the magic circuit in his body was starting to split. They were independent from the arcane circuits and were specialized natural magic circuits. Although he had previously obtained the power of wind and lightning from the storm altar, it had always been a simulation of nature mana converted from arcane power. It was not an independent power. Now, it was clear that his power had formed independently. With the addition of the divinity of wind, Duque's personal divine artifact also changed. Duque's integrity. Attack 1 to 999. Every attack deals 220 fire damage and 150 nature damage. One-handed long sword. Soulbound to Duke Marcus. Duque's integrity. Special effect 4, reality transformation. With the support of the divinity of wind, you can transform the appearance of this sword into any sword weapon you have seen with your own eyes. According to your own strength attribute and your understanding of the artifact, you can display a certain degree of the artifact's power. Its maximum power does not exceed 70% of the original. With regards to this new feature, Duque was convinced. This was clearly asking him to play the imitation game to the end. Fine. It's useless for a mage to use the wind sword, but I can cosplay with a fake one, right? That was why when Duque was experimenting with the new effect, Li Gue met Li Kue. Seeing that Gavin Rad was on the verge of breaking down, Duke stabbed Duke's integrity, which was in the shape of a wind sword, into the ground. Then, he put his hands on his waist and said, "I see that your divine sword is very cool. I'll use magic to transform it, okay? Fine. You're the boss, you call the shots." Gavin Rad rolled his eyes. The next second, Duque suddenly attacked. Xueqi picked up the wind sword and stabbed it at Gavin Rad. At first, Gavin Rad and the others were dumbfounded, but they immediately understood what Xueqi was doing. As a mage without haste, Xueqi's lousy swordsmanship was like slow motion in front of these powerhouses. It was ridiculous. If Xueqi had suddenly gone crazy and wanted to cut Gavin Rad, it would not have been like this. The only explanation was that Xueqi wanted to fight Gavin Rad. With a flick of his wrist, Gavin Rad used the Thunder's Fury, blessed sword of the Windseeker. Bam! It was a simple clash of swords. The moment the two swords clashed, Gavin Rad immediately understood. The feeling from the blades told him that the two swords were different. Even though they had the same source of wind elemental energy, the fundamental difference was obvious. Xueqi's sword did not have Prince Thunderan's soul. Only Gavin Rad's wind sword was the real deal. Gavin Rad could feel that the sword in front of him did not have as much wind elemental energy as his, but it had fire elemental energy. Wind and fire elemental energy? Gavin Rad suddenly understood. A normal powerhouse who was proficient in one element was already a powerful powerhouse. For example, Ronan had studied arcane magic to the extreme and became the chairman of the Dalajan Kirin Tor Parliament. Xueqi actually wanted to reach the peak of the four elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. And this was not an unattainable dream. It was a goal that could be achieved. Because Xueqi had already obtained the divinity of two of the strongest people in the territory. Boss, you have indeed chosen a different and noble path. Gavin Rad could not help but be in awe and put away the wind sword of his own accord. As Xueqi put away the sword, he also removed the illusion of Xueqi's moral integrity. Everyone could finally see that Xueqi's divine artifact had returned to that strange spiral conical shape. Xueqi smiled evilly. Everyone's path is different. You choose your own path. Even if the end of the path is hell, you have to finish it even if you cry and kneel, right? Yes. Gavin Rad's eyes flashed, and he suddenly stiffened up. All right, Gavin Rad, it's rare to get a divine artifact. Don't you want to try the sword? Of course. Gavin Rad said decisively. Leave the Reed Ridge Mountain defense line to me. Xueqi smiled. That's good. Dear Mr. Storm Knight, Ronan, Jaina, and Elusia will accompany you. I will go to the barren lands with Tyrion. The pair of master and servant lightly touched each other's divine weapons, creating a whistling sound of the wind. The two divine artifacts of the same origin swung apart. At this moment, at the barrier between the barren lands and the dwarves' territory of Loch Moden, the dwarves had built the Greyclaw Mountain defense line according to Xueqi's suggestion 5 years ago in order to prevent attacks from wild beasts and Black Rock Mountain. It was a fulcrum formed by many fortresses, and it was connected to a continuous stretch of the city wall. Brian was very annoyed. Chapter 1193. Those terrifying dragons hardly needed to stop, and they attacked the dwarves' territory day and night. At first, they could still use the best dwarven hunters to kite the dragons and try to lure them into the barren land. But later, the Dragon Gate apparently received orders from Nefarian and attacked the Greyclaw Mountain defense line. Bu Lang had no choice but to let the steam bulldozer dig a deep trench in front of the defense line and try to delay as much time as possible. Unfortunately, the dragons had already broken through many lines of defense and were only 2 trenches away from the city wall. Damn it! Why isn't Big Brother done yet? Done. His boss's voice appeared behind him like a ghost, scaring Bu Lang so much that he almost activated Deity's Descent. Looking at the huge dragons that were easily 2 or 3 stories tall playing in the distance, Magni had been suppressing his anger for a long time. If Duke had not insisted on waiting for the wind sword to be completed, he would have rushed up and killed those dragon beasts. Almost as soon as he came out of the portal, he rushed over with his short legs and jumped off the city wall. Well, when such a big short man jumped over the wall, his short legs even stretched out a few times. Xueqi and his women couldn't help but laugh on the spot. There was no beauty in the jump, but the landing was incomparably gorgeous. Instantly activating Deity's Descent, Magni, the giant that was the size of a small house, unscientifically announced his arrival with his weight. Bang! A heavy body had a heavy landing, and after he fell, the powerful impact immediately caused an earthquake-like shaking. Then, who the hell dug so many trenches? I can't go over. Hee hee. On the city wall, Bu Lang Bronzebeard's face darkened. Digging so many trenches was naturally to prevent the dragons from rushing under the city wall and demolishing it. The dragons were so tall, of course, they dug as deep as they could, and at the same time poured oil, tar, and other things to slow down the other party. Well, now they really dug their own people. Who knew you would come back so quickly? I thought it would take 1 or 2 more weeks. Xueqi rubbed his eyebrows. While the Bronzebeard brothers were spitting saliva at each other, he cast Slow Fall and flew over the trench lightly. He had to admit that when Bu Lang was not a hunter, he was also a talented defensive player. On the surface, the crisscrossing trenches were there to block the enemy. In reality, there were still some dark paths that ran through the entire defensive line. At first, the outsiders did not think that there was a problem with the road. As they walked, they found that the road was getting narrower and narrower. However, the troops behind them would continue to force the people in front to walk, and soon, they would have to face the sharper and sharper traps on both sides of the road. Spiked pits, high-temperature fires, freezing traps, sulfuric acid sprayers. Bu Lang was using the hunter's skills on the battlefield. Xueqi concluded that if this guy's heart was cut open, it would definitely be black. Tyrant called out to Xueqi from behind. Xueqi, do you want me to go with you? Xueqi waved his hand. There's no need. I'm just going to have a chat with the dragons. After that, the two sides had a friendly and harmonious discussion on peaceful coexistence, mutual benefit, advancing with the times, and creating a better future together. That's right. If they could fight, they would never use words. Countless magicians' hands floated in the air, casting all kinds of low-level spells on the dragons. Fire, frost, arcane, holy, shadow, nature. The Dalajan mages on the defensive wall finally saw how terrifying the #1 mage in the Alliance of Mysteries was. Xueqi was a living magic encyclopedia. He alone was a terrifying existence that 10 mages could not compare to. Every dragon that was messing around and destroying the defense line was hit by 5 or 6 spells almost at the same time. In the eyes of outsiders, the draconic beasts were completely unharmed. Only Duke could clearly see the weakness of each draconic beast in the system notification. In the next moment, Xueqi's whisper of the wind drifted across the entire defensive line. Dalajan mages, listen up. Flatbread uses fire attacks, Diamond uses frost attacks, Triangle uses arcane spells. After giving his orders, Xueqi added, leave the rest to me. The mage's heart started beating rapidly. Actually, the method of fighting the dragons had long been tested. It was nothing more than using various elemental attacks to find out which element the dragon's weakness was. However, the situation on the battlefield was ever-changing. Many times it had been tested. If a few dragons accidentally crossed each other's positions, it would be very easy to mistake them. After the first dragons failed to confuse the alliance with their skin color, Nefarian decided to make all the dragons look the same. This way, it would be very easy to confuse the attackers. Normal mages did not have as much mana as Xueqi did. They were so free that they could concentrate their mana on the monsters' heads to mark them. Hence, it was very difficult to fight the dragons. The most troublesome thing was that if the dragons rushed in front of them, the normal mages would basically die after using Flash and Ice Barrier. It was not like now, where they could safely stand on the city wall and aim at the targets. Go! Kill them! For the Alliance. Let these monsters see the light of Dalajan magic. The mages were excited. It was the climax. They fired with all their might. Xueqi strolled leisurely in the turbulent flow of elemental energy. Low-level mysticism was destined to be unable to break through high-level mysticism. The difference in levels was too great. The low-level magic would naturally be repelled by the highly concentrated mana on the magic shield around Xueqi. Xueqi kept flashing in and out of the battle line. He directly flashed behind the dragons of the nature element and used Xueqi's moral principles to teach them a lesson. These dragons were the product of extremes. They had extraordinary resistance to attacks and magic of other elements, but against the elements that restrained them, they could deal 10 times the damage. Basically, with the power of Xueqi's Tang poetry swordsmanship, a single slash would be enough to kill a dragon. The so-called moral principles were to throw it out, pick it up, throw it out, pick it up, throw it out, pick it up. Wait a minute. Something seems wrong? Have I, Xueqi, ever had moral principles? Cough cough. Please don't mind these small details. On the city wall, Aurelia initially shot a few arrows at the unmarked monsters. However, when she saw how happy Xueqi was, she stopped moving. Haha. Do you think Nefarian noticed? Sylvanas laughed. It's impossible not to notice. Unless the Black Dragon King is an idiot. At the same time, on the highest floor of the Blackrock Spire, Nefarian swept all the food on the table to the ground in anger. Bastard. The appearance of the wind sword at the Reed Ridge Mountains did not mean anything. The Balrog hammer at the front line in the barren land could definitely prove that Ragnaros' avatar was dead. Chapter 1194. Nefarian's heart was filled with unease. The dragon beast that he was so proud of was easily defeated. The Alliance's cautiousness made it so that the dragons did not cause any substantial damage. He thought that the Alliance's strategy of trading space for time was just a last-ditch struggle. Now, in the magic mirror, the corpses of the dragons all over the mountains were a slap in his face. His invention was not even worth mentioning in Xueqi's eyes. Fear gripped his heart. Victory could cover up everything. Failure could make all the uneasiness and fear emerge. Seeing Xueqi slaughtering his dragons like pigs with a strange spiral sword, no matter how calm Nefarian was, he could not help but think of the fate of his father and sister. His father, who was better at fighting than him, was once insufferably arrogant and dominated the planet Azeroth for tens of thousands of years. However, his father's dragon head was already hung in the Dragon Sleep Temple, and even his soul was being punished by his ancestors in the Dragon Sleep Temple. His sister, who was more cunning than him, was still in Stormwind City not long ago and almost stole the supreme power of Stormwind City. Now, at night, she shamelessly submitted to a human and was ridden by him to enjoy his pleasure. During the day, she was also ridden. She dominated the world as a humble mount. The human Nefarian walked down from his throne and paced back and forth. He was thinking about all the possibilities. At this moment, a strong yet weak existence suddenly broke into his domain. He almost immediately sensed the other party's intrusion. He said it was strong because the other party's soul was extremely condensed. He could easily sense that kind of commander-level aura that was not deliberately suppressed. He said it was weak because the other party did not seem to have a physical body. It was just an unimportant projection. Nefarian frowned, turned around, and stepped onto the throne. He said loudly, "Come out." An extremely beautiful and coquettish woman stepped out of the void. With curved horns, black bat wings, a nimble black tail, and typical hooves, she grandly showed her identity to Nefarian. "Burning Legion Beginner Void Lord Aless greets you, Great Dark Dragon King." Nefarian narrowed his eyes. He did not have the slightest good impression of this demon lord's visit. That's right, black dragons were just that unsociable. They didn't like their brethren of other colors, and they hated demons even more. "If you have something to say it." "I'm in a hurry to do the experiment," Nefarian said, displaying his geek nature. "Hee. Now that the Alliance is about to kill their way to your throne?" Aura smiled seductively. She put her hands on her hips, showing off her beautiful S-shaped curves. Humph. Nefarian's face was cold. Noticing that Nefarian's patience was reaching its limit, Aureus chuckled and said, "The great Lord Kill, Jaden already has a plan to dismember that damned alliance. All you need to do is not to be defeated by Duke Marcus so quickly. Or, after you are defeated, you must be willing to escape this place that will send you to hell. As long as you're alive, those mortals won't be able to sleep well." "Hey! Bastard!" Nefarian suddenly flicked his finger, and a black flame shot across the void and landed on Auraz's body like a bolt of lightning. Auraz was instantly burned to ashes. But so what? The cunning female evil demon, from the beginning to the end, she had only sent a menacing phantom into the room. It was not even a doppelganger. Nefarian was very unhappy. He was so unhappy that he was about to explode like a volcano. Bastard demon. What do you think I, the king of the black dragons, am? Damn it. 3 seconds later, the entire Blackrock Tower was suddenly filled with a terrifying dragon roar that could split the earth and mountains. Roar. In the Blackwing's nest, every single dragon revealed a horrified expression. Every black iron dwarf craftsman and every blackwing goblin craftsman either hugged their heads and fled, or knelt on the ground and trembled. No one knew why their master, the king of the black dragons Nefarian, was suddenly so angry. At the highest level of Blackwing's nest, Nefarian sat on the throne that the most outstanding goblin technician had made for him. Nefarian panted heavily. He was forcing himself to calm down. This was purely for the sake of calmness. For the sake of calmness. A voice responded to his call in his spiritual sea. This will was so powerful that even though Nefarian knew that the other party was just a divine thought, as a demigod, he still had a terrible illusion that he couldn't even resist the other party's divine thought. Hee, are you finally willing to call me? I agree to the conditions you mentioned last time. I will offer my sister, the purest princess of the Black Dragons, Onyxia, as a sacrifice, Nefarian said in a low voice. Hee. Your so-called sacrificial offering isn't in your hands. Offering something that doesn't belong to you as a sacrifice. Are you kidding me? I have endless time to wait, but it doesn't mean that I am willing to wait for endless time. Within 100 days, I want to see my sacrifice. If I don't see it, you know the price. Nefarian trembled all over and finally gritted his teeth. You will see it. Very good. You will get what you want. The voice finished the last note and floated away. At this moment, on the battlefield in the barren land, the Alliance was cleaning up the battlefield. The ferocious group of dragon beasts had long been slaughtered to pieces. Although these terrible monsters still launched a desperate attack on the Alliance army, they could no longer cause any large-scale damage. After the dwarves' most elite royal secret room guards activated Deity's descent, they carried the berserk dragons, and then a group of mages concentrated their attacks. Of course, there were more exaggerated ways to fight. Wahaha! Die! As Duque's mount, a certain princess made a lightning raid, fell from the sky, with sharp and huge dragon claws, grabbed the necks of 2 dragons in one breath, and then with a flap of her wings, climbed rapidly, and finally dropped the dragons at a height of more than 500 meters, playing free fall. Dragons were not giant dragons. They had no ability to fly. So what if their resistance was high? Their own weight, coupled with the acceleration of gravity, was the most terrible killer. Bang! 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 Every fall of a dragon was bound to hit a number of dragons as a cushion. If they were hit, it would be a bloody mess, and several corpses would be broken into pieces, indistinguishable from each other. It seemed that Onyxia was addicted to playing with airdropped dragon bombs. Hee, Master. Am I not awesome? In the face of the Princess of the Black Dragon asking for credit, Duque always felt that her flight trajectory was funny, for a while, and for a while, but he could not discourage her enthusiasm, so he could only say, not bad. At this moment, Duque suddenly felt an inexplicable fear. Chapter 1195. Duque had never experienced such a feeling since he transmigrated to Azeroth. This almost intuitive feeling was not the kind of nonsense that, the left eyelid twitching means you're going to get rich, and the right eyelid twitching means you're in trouble. It was more extraordinary, a feeling that involved the rhythm of fate. This was not an exaggeration. Ever since Duque took part of Ragnaros and Prince Thunderan's divinity, the most obvious feeling was that he was more sensitive to the wind and fire elements. The 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wind were the basic elements that formed the world of Azeroth. If he received feedback from Azeroth, Duque would not be surprised at all. System Elf, scan my body, mind, and soul, and analyze my strange reaction just now. Understood. Host. The system, which did countless calculations in a second, did not come up with anything in the end. But Duque did not give up. He was not the kind of person who had allergies and would be nervous about everything. He was more willing to believe that this was the warning signal given to him by his brain. Sometimes, people would have warning signals in their hearts, but it was not because their rationality found something wrong. Instead, it was his brain that made judgments about his surroundings that were not rational. For example, if there was something wrong with his surroundings, the brain's warning system could not directly connect to the human mind. It could only make people feel that something was wrong in a similar way. Something must be wrong. Sitting on Onyxia's dragon saddle, Duque cupped his chin and pondered. Master, what's wrong? Let me calm down. I suddenly feel that something is wrong. Onyxia obediently shut up. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning from the spiritual world struck Duque's mind. He knew where his problem was. As a transmigrator, although he also understood that the future of this world would not develop 100% according to the history he knew,
But after using foresight time and time again to gain advantages and benefits, Xueqi's subconscious had already determined that everything would develop in order.
Obviously, this was not possible. The occurrence of some major events required time to ferment and specific conditions to trigger. But there were many events that could erupt unreasonably. Who the Xueqi said that Nefarian had to hide in the highest floor of Blackrock Spire like an idiot and wait for Xueqi to lead the team to slay the dragon. Who the hell said that other forces couldn't take advantage of this opportunity to stir up trouble? There were plenty of people who were qualified to cause trouble. Looking at the bigger picture, the Burning Legion's big three, the 5 ancient gods, and the 4 elemental lords, which one of them did not have the power to shake the world with just a stomp of their feet? The smaller ones were the Lich King, Illidan, the evil god Hacker that the forest trolls worshipped, and various giant dragons that were seeking death. Even the smallest forces were innumerable. He gathered all the elites of the Alliance and the Horde to play the hero group, which would greatly increase the efficiency of the exploration. On the other hand, wasn't it like walking on a tightrope? Thinking of this, Xueqi had a plan. He directly opened the magic message, "I am Duke Marcus." There's going to be a major change in the next part of the plan. On the 10th of December, year 21 of the Dark Portal, the Alliance-led crusade against Blackwing's Nest had officially begun. The Alliance had invested almost all the strong players they could, but for the Horde, the Alliance surprisingly only wanted 2 strong players, Grom Hellscream and Bloodhoof Kane. Forget about Varrock, they didn't even want Wajin. Blackwing's Nest was obviously a special area. The Black Dragon King Nefarian used his evil magic to seal all connections with the outside world. Not even a magic message could be sent out, let alone a teleportation portal. In this regard, the various kingdoms and even the Horde were a little used to it. During the crusade against the Fire Demon King in the Molten Core, it was the same. The Guardians that were left behind had their own duties. However, on the 1st of January 22 years after entering the Door of Darkness, the entire world underwent a drastic change. In the Thousand Needles at the southern end of the Horde's territory, huge stone pillars stood in the middle of this barren and huge valley. Windy Mound was guarded by the Taurens, and it was the most important stronghold of the Horde. From the bottom of the valley to Windy Mound, it was impossible to walk up the steep stone walls. The only way was to use the Taurens to stir ropes and pull people up using a manual lift. It was daytime, cloudless, and Windy Mound had the best view. Suddenly, a Tauren pointed to the south and said, "Look, what is that?" Buzz buzz buzz. The sound came from afar. Soon, it turned from a low buzzing sound to a terrifying buzzing sound that not even a bomber corps could make. What the hell? That's not a cloud. Giant insects covered the entire sky. The sentinel's scream also alarmed the commander of Windy Mound. What the hell? What is that? He roared for the other Tauren warriors to prepare for battle while he informed the messenger. Find a way to tell the great chief that Windy Mound is finished. It was destroyed by a group of giant insects flying from the south. Within half a day, bad news came one after another. Dozens of attack reports were placed on Thrall's desk. This was thanks to the magic communication system provided by the humans. The unskilled trolls worked hard to spread the news. At least, Thrall was not like the previous tribes, where it would take several days to receive news from the distant border. From the Mosaic Camp in the southwest of Feralas, to the Thousand Needles in the south and Gadgetsan in the Tanaris Desert where a large number of goblins gathered, and to the southern part of the Barren Lands, 1/3 of the tribe's control area had been attacked by giant insects. According to the report, these giant flying insects, which looked a bit like praying mantis, came from the Silithus area in the southwest of Kalimdor. These large insects did not distinguish between right and wrong at all. They were like locusts that attacked all living creatures along the way. Thrall tentatively asked Wajin, "Is there any news from the Alliance?" In fact, Thrall was asking if it was the Alliance's doing. Wajin smiled bitterly and handed Thrall a report that he had not noticed before. When Thrall saw it, he suddenly smiled bitterly because the report said that a large beetle army had attacked the Cavern of Time in the Tanaris Desert. Well, that was the lair of the Bronze Dragons. Even if the Alliance did not have the brains to want to cause trouble, they would never burn the dragon's head. After all, the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu, who was known to have a bad temper, lived there. On the same day, a terrible floating city appeared without warning in the sea near Stormwind City. It was a huge, three-dimensional, diamond-shaped floating fortress. Its appearance naturally caused panic among the soldiers and civilians of Stormwind City.
Damn it! What is that? On the tower next to Stormwind Port, Duke Bolvar for Dragon could not help but tremble a little. Chapter 1196. A shrill alarm rang through the sky. Even though Stormwind City had long announced that it had entered a state of war, this majestic city of the southern continent, which had not experienced the flames of war for nearly 20 years since the Dark Portal was restored after the end of World War II, was still in slight chaos. A large number of cargo ships that had yet to enter Stormwind Port hurriedly evaded, and many captains even ordered their ships to rush onto the beach. Anyway, with the help of the Murlocs and Nagas, it was not difficult to drag the ships back into the sea. It was fine as long as the keel and the crew's lives were preserved. In Stormwind Port, the soldiers nervously rushed into the various watchtowers and turrets. Holy light above! How are we going to defend against such a terrifying floating fortress? His Majesty is not here. A Stormwind general muttered. No, I'm here. Along with the sonorous voice, the soldiers of Stormwind were pleasantly surprised to see their king, William Ryn, dressed in military attire, striding up the city tower under the protection of his two good partners, Valilla and Brawl. Your Majesty, didn't you go to Blackwing's nest? Not to mention the people below, even Bolvar, who was the regent, did not know that William was actually here. William revealed a slightly bitter expression. Although I don't want to admit it, Brother Duque is really a prophet. The king was the backbone of a kingdom. The backbone was there. The backbone of the kingdom was there. Those who could become commanders were mostly veterans who had experienced many battles, and even 3 battles at the Dark Portal. Facing the fortress that was emitting an evil aura of death in the sky, the commanders did not have to wait for orders from their superiors. Bring out the holy water. Against those monsters, blessed holy light weapons are 10,000 times better than ordinary swords. No, you idiots. I didn't say that you have to throw away your sword. I just want you to bring an extra weapon. While the people below were in an uproar, William, who was on top of the city wall, bowed slightly to the people behind him. I'm counting on you, Lady Solarian. Solarian, who walked out of the city tower, was still dressed in a seemingly ridiculous maid uniform. However, from the envious and hateful gazes of a few Stormwind Kingdom's court mages, one could tell how envious that set of clothes that looked like a maid's robe was. Heavens! They actually dyed the wavering robe black and white and changed it into a maid uniform. What a waste! Only the Marcus family could make a maid's dress out of something that even the great spellcasters were jealous of. William, who had followed Duke on one of his expeditions, was convinced by the Marcus family's heroic spirit. However, envy was just envy. These court mages were all Radiant Moon mages who had spent years and resources to become Radiant Moon mages. Not to mention comparing themselves to Elugia, even Gina Goldsword was far inferior in terms of talent. Although Azeroth had undergone a great change recently, and because the mana was denser than before, more high-level mages had emerged, but talent still determined the limits of a mage's growth. They were very fortunate to be indebted to a Breaking Dawn wizard, Duke Marcus, to personally modify the magic circuits in their bodies. Otherwise, being a Morning Star wizard would have been their limit for the rest of their lives. Even so, Duque had only helped them cross the threshold of the Radiant Moon realm, and that was the limit. With their innate talent, they could not control a higher level of power. Back then, no one understood why Duque had insisted on spending 2 years' worth of taxes in Stormwind to build 12 Radiant Moon wizard towers. Everyone was even more confused as to why Duke would spend so much effort to groom 12 Radiant Moon archmages who were not qualified enough. Now everyone knew. On the cliffs on both sides of Stormwind Port, the 4 wizard towers first lit up with a dazzling light. Then, the other 8 wizard towers in Stormwind City also shone with the brilliance of fire magic. Fire runes shot out from the tips of the standard hexagonal pyramid-shaped towers. These runes emitted surging waves of fire elemental energy and gathered together in the air, forming a huge magic formation the size of 5 football fields. In the next moment, blazing sunlight broke through the clouds and landed on this exaggerated magic formation. Immediately, it was reflected and turned into a scarlet pillar of light that pierced through the sky. In an instant, it conquered more than 10,000 meters of the void and fiercely bombarded the huge floating fortress. A terrifying dark aura surged out from the fortress, forming a hemispherical shield of light in front of the golden pillar of light. Bang! Black and yellow, the 2 colors that symbolized darkness and fire collided intensely in the air.
This short confrontation firmly attracted the gazes of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians in Stormwind City. No one dared to look away. Even if their throats were dry, even if their eyes hurt, everyone did their best to open their eyes wide, wanting to witness what would happen next. Would the powerful magic bombardment end in failure, causing Stormwind City, the majestic city of the southern continent that had been in operation for almost 20 years, to be trampled again? Or would the opponent's seemingly invincible floating fortress suffer a head-on blow, and the soldiers and civilians of Stormwind City once again defend the safety fortress that they had built with their blood and sweat for 20 years? The answer would be revealed in the next 3 seconds. 1 second. 2 seconds. Abruptly, the thick black light shield finally caved in like a boulder that had been smashed by a tremendous force. It let out an earth-shattering crack. In the next moment, it was as if time had frozen. Everyone could clearly see that the black protective shield had been completely pierced. It was purely because the floating fortress seemed to have refracted the pillar of light at the last moment, thus avoiding the nightmare of being pierced through in one shot. Even so, everyone could clearly see that the entire northeast corner of the four-cornered, cone-shaped fortress had been blown up. Everyone could hear the earth-shattering explosion. Countless rocks were knocked away from the floating fortress and fell into the sea like a heavy downpour. Damn it! Damn it! How could this be? His Majesty had painstakingly found Naxxramas. In the command post at the core of the fortress, the great Lich Kel, Thuzad, was hopping mad. Many years ago, the Crypt Lord Anubalak led a group of undead warriors into the Nerub psionic tower that was now named Naxxramas. The forces of the Scourge wreaked havoc in the fortress. The will of the Lich King transformed the passage of the fortress into a powerful war machine. Dark magic pulled the fortress up from the ground and floated in the air. Everyone thought that once Naxxramas appeared, the Alliance countries could only raise their hands and surrender. Who knew that Xueqi would turn Stormwind City into a hedgehog city armed to the teeth, so that Naxxramas couldn't even attack? Chapter 1197. After the main cannon fired, it was time for the mage towers to open fire. The chaotic light streaked across the sky, and it was a beautiful sight. Elemental magic cannons of various colors bombarded the jet-black outer wall of Naxxramas that was emitting a green light, blooming with strange fireworks. Obviously, even without the outermost magic shield, the walls of the fortress itself had been treated with powerful protection spells, and it had a good magic defense. In each mage tower, the magic apprentices were the lowest-level magic craftsmen, and also the cannoneers of the magic cannons. They hurriedly followed the operating procedures and channeled magic power into the huge magic cannons that were similar to magic staffs, and then blindly poured the firepower into the huge fortress in the sky. And the intermediate sky rank mages were busy in all the important parts of the mage tower. Usually, the mage tower rarely opened fire. After all, it would cause panic among the citizens, and it would also consume magic gems that were more expensive than gold. Without actual combat experience, all kinds of situations could be said to be endless. Solarian stood at the top of Xueqi's mage tower, looking at the scene in the magic mirror expressionlessly. As the full agent of Xueqi, she had almost 90% of the authority of this mage tower. She ordered expressionlessly, "Open all the elemental furnaces, and complete the magic charge as soon as possible. If this floating fortress doesn't roll away, then give it another shot." The higher-ups moved their mouths, and the people below broke their legs. Below them, there was a commotion. In the floating fortress of Naxxramas, if the dead could have any other color, it would be ashen. Unfortunately, it was not possible. "My lord, what should we do?" A lich bowed and asked Kel Thuzad. Kel Thuzad exuded a strange aura, and his red eyes flickered non-stop. In the end, his strange skull with 2 pairs of horns moved. "The mortals have indeed given us an unexpected surprise, but this does not mean that they are qualified to ignore the majesty of my lord. Go, spread the glory of my lord, and then we will go to the Iron Furnace Castle." It was as if a meteor shower fell from the sky. Every Alliance soldier knew that it had nothing to do with beauty and nature. It was a huge patchwork monster, or a large zombie monster. Storm City could protect hundreds of thousands of people in the city from harm, but it could not protect the civilians outside the city. William was helpless as he watched the gigantic floating fortress fly away from Stormwind City and wreak havoc in the surroundings. William's irritable side came out. When the lives of his people were threatened, his ghost wolf roguish personality took over. He punched the solid battlement, and the terrifying force caused cracks to appear on the battlement. "Gather our soldiers. Let the royal knights set off first. I want to destroy those damned bones." "Please wait a moment. Your Majesty, you should at least wait until Kudrin's Griffin Legion arrives." Right. It was best to wait for those ferocious birds. At least I won't be bothered by the gargoyles." Servanas, who was the first to speak, had no problem with it. The problem was the second person who spoke. That person had a lazy voice, and it gave William a headache, especially the Earl of Stormwind insignia on his chest. "Yep, it's Onyxia." She had been left by Xueqi to work for William. Xueqi had beaten her up with the dragon-taming whip a few times before she agreed. However, one of her requests was that Stormwind had to give her a proper name when ordering her around. Hence, there was one less Countess Katrana Anristo, and one more Countess Onyxia. Although it was a little pitiful for the Princess of the Black Dragon to only be a countess, she was considered to have entered the alliance openly. Because of this, Xueqi had set 3 rules for everyone during the alliance meeting. She could work for them, but she had no say in any of the decisions. She also put forward a strange condition. She refused to be ridden by any male, and only agreed to let a few queens or the high priests of the night elves sit on her dragon saddle. William had a lot of respect for Servanas, a heroine who stood up for her compatriots when they were in despair. He suppressed his anger, gritted his teeth, and nodded in agreement. "All right. We'll deal with those despicable bones when everyone arrives." William's eyes were still fixed on the floating fortress. Waiting was painful. By the time the Griffin army from the Reed Ridge Mountain and the Watchtower arrived, Naxxramas had already wreaked havoc outside Stormwind City. Although William tried his best to evacuate the people, more than 50,000 people were killed in a short span of 24 hours. Most of them had been turned into zombies or skeleton soldiers. Gold's Higher Town, south of Stormwind City, was completely razed to the ground. This also meant that the railway hub that ran through Stormwind City had been destroyed, and the railway traffic was paralyzed. Kel Thuzad also ordered an attack on the Northshire Abbey, and destroyed 5 of Stormwind's new army camps. When more than 1,000 griffins arrived, Onyxia let out a long cry and flew into the sky. Together with a dozen pure-blooded firehawks, Naxxramas began to recall his troops and flew towards the north. In 3 days, Stormwind had left nearly 100,000 undead, and the ground was full of devastation. The problem was that even though the Alliance had gathered thousands of air forces after 3 days, they still couldn't do anything to this floating fortress. The terrifying negative energy magic cannons caused a barrage of bullets so dense that even Onyxia didn't dare to rush over, let alone the pure-blooded firehawks and griffins. The Alliance's air force sent Naxxramas off almost all the way, from the Elven Forest all the way to the north, across the Scorching Canyon, to Loch Moden, to the wetlands across the straits, to the destroyed Torrent Fortress, to the Eagle's Nest Mountain, and finally into the eastern Plaguelands. Every time they arrived at an Alliance settlement, Naxxramas would drop a large mass of shadow energy from the air, then drop a group of undead soldiers as seeds, and start a massacre everywhere. They weren't afraid that the Alliance would kill off their airborne troops. After all, they were all worthless bones. It wasn't that the Alliance didn't know that this move of Kel Thuzad's was most likely to tie up the Alliance's forces and reduce the pressure on Nefarian in Blackwing's nest. But the Alliance couldn't come up with a better solution. Because the Alliance didn't have the corresponding measures to fight against Naxxramas. They could only let the Blood Elf archers led by Sylvanas ride Dragon Hawks, and the Dalajan mages follow Naxxramas. They also did their best to coordinate with the troops on the ground. In the middle of January, something even more disgusting happened. The Amani trolls hiding in the depths of the southeast of Longsong Forest, and the trolls in the east of Stranglethorn Vale, who believed in the evil god Hacker, caused trouble at the same time. It could be said that there was no mastermind behind all this. Chapter 1198. These days, the Alliance held meetings almost every day. Everyone was glad that Xueqi had left most of the strong people in the hero group behind at the critical moment, but they were also worried about Naxxramas' shameless tactics. Obviously, what Xueqi said before he left should be correct. Arthas, who had become the Lich King, had not yet awakened. If an enemy came, it would at most be Arthas's adjutant, Kel Thuzad. The problem was that Kel Thuzad was also very disgusting. If the Lich King was excluded, the Alliance and the Scourge army would set up a battle formation, and the Alliance's millions of troops would definitely beat the Scourge army to pieces. But Naxxramas was leading the Alliance's main force in circles. If they didn't care about it, it would create a 1,000-mile undead paradise. Who cared? Naxxramas flew at a speed of 30 to 40 kilometers per hour. It flew in a straight line in the sky and broke its legs on the ground. Even the strongest cavalry, 1 man and 3 horses, couldn't follow Naxxramas and run 500 to 600 kilometers a day. Fortunately, the Alliance had enough griffins now. 20 years ago they had fully trained them, which was why they had the huge scale of more than 3,000 adult griffins. If it was the second battle at the Dark Portal, including the old and the young, the griffins that could fight were only 1,000. The Griffin Legion was thoroughly exhausted. Apart from Onyxia and the dozen or so pure-blooded firehawks, no air force could withstand it. All kinds of plans, regardless of whether they were feasible or not, were put on the table. In the end, there were 2 more reliable ones. One was to build a large number of dwarven airships, load them with a large number of explosives, and crash into Naxxramas when they self-destructed. The other was to build a super-floating mothership that could rival Naxxramas. Of course, no matter which plan it was, it couldn't be done on the spot. Even if the gnome master craftsman Jurban had an IQ of 300, it couldn't be like some shameless transmigrator who could directly turn a blueprint into a blueprint. This was because in industrial machinery, the role of almost every gear and every transmission bearing needed to be constantly tested and debugged in practice to produce a relatively perfect set of machinery. The ready-made airships were all rubbish with a big balloon hanging on it. A single gargoyle could make the whole ship full of people fly in the air. There was still a long way to go to make an airship that could fly in the sky with just a propeller. In the end, the Alliance had no choice but to divide their forces. In the north, in the Sin-Dorii kingdom, the famous troll killer Aurelia was leading Lord Thema and the other blood elves, as well as some radiant moon mages, to suppress the uprising of the Amani trolls. The various kingdoms evacuated their citizens as much as possible, gathering them in the main cities with stronger defenses. On the southern front, Varian and the other 2 would lead the Stormwind army to deal with the trolls who worshipped the evil god Hacker in Zul-Gurub. The rest of the powerhouses chased after Naxxramas, while the elite troops played regional defense. Whichever kingdom they went to, the troops of that kingdom would surround and intercept Naxxramas's undead troops. As for the tribes in the Kalimdor continent that were beaten like dogs, none of the eastern kingdoms had the time to care about them. In Kalimdor, Sar was also badly battered. South of the crossroads in the Barren Lands, all the newly built villages of the tribes had been destroyed by the flying insects. The death toll was close to 20,000. More than 40,000 orcs and 20,000 Taurens had lost their homes. This was because the tribe's territory was relatively barren and sparsely populated. Sar didn't dare to imagine what would happen if the insects of Silithus attacked Duroder. The only fortunate thing was that the Night Elves and Queen Proudmoore of Theramore responded to the tribe's request for help and promised to send reinforcements as soon as possible. The army needed time to assemble, and the southernmost territory of the Night Elves, Grey Valley, was more than 2,000 kilometers away from Silithus. It was impossible to send the main force. The only ones who could come were the sentinels of the Feather Moon stronghold stationed on Sardo Island in the southwest of the Kalimdor continent. But no one expected that on the 5th of February, the undead floating fortress Naxxramas, which had disappeared from the eastern kingdoms, would attack the trolls' territory, Darkspear Island, in the middle of the night. On the 7th of February, they attacked the Horde's main city, Agrima. On the 10th of February, they attacked the Taurens' main city, Thunder Cliff. Because the Horde seriously lacked long-range attacks, the destruction and casualties caused by Naxxramas to the Horde were at least 3 times that of the Alliance. More than 50,000 soldiers and civilians of the Horde died in battle. The vitality that they had recovered after crossing the Kalimdor continent could be said to have been swept away once again. On the 11th of February, after almost sweeping Thundercliff, Naxxramas turned around and seemed to be ready to attack Agrima again. Sal, who was almost forced to a dead end, finally officially announced that he would accept the Forsaken into the Horde and continue to provide support for the Horde's Mage Corps. When Anastrian led the former members of the Silver Moon Council to repel the attack of Naxxramas in Agrima, the orcs burst into thunderous cheers. Unfortunately, Sal couldn't laugh. This was because the deputy commander of the Alliance, Turalian, who now had full authority over the Alliance's military, sent a diplomatic note, announcing that the Alliance reserved the right to investigate the Forsaken leader, Anastrian Sunstrider, for defecting to the Scourge army, betraying Kuel Salus, and creating a large number of crimes against the living. The relationship between the Alliance and the Horde suddenly fell to a freezing point. The Night Elves and Theramore's reinforcements all stopped. In fact, it became the Horde alone against the swarm from Silithus. They didn't know what was wrong with those insects, but they only attacked the Horde and did not touch the Alliance's Feathermoon stronghold and Theramore. This was obviously to drive a wedge between the Alliance and the Horde. In Lordaeron City, after hearing the battle report, Turalyon was silent for a long time. In this magic version of the online conference, Turalyon sighed as he looked at the Alliance's big shots in the magic mirror. Basically, I can confirm that this is the work of Killed Jaden the Swindler. Only he can link up with so many terrifying forces to attack the Alliance and the Horde together. Is there any way to solve this? Queen Jaina asked. Turalyon shook his head. Please forgive me for being slow, but I can't think of any good ideas. Tyrande also sighed. Can we only wait for Xueqi to deal with Nefarian and come out?
Since none of us have any good ideas, it seems that this is the only way.
The big shots of the Alliance fell into the deepest silence. Xueqi, who everyone had high hopes for, was having a headache. Of course, he knew that the outside world was probably in chaos, but he didn't think that Nefarian the scientific geek would be so shameless. Xueqi looked up and shouted, "Which bastard suggested that Nefarian turned Blackwing's nest into a labyrinth?" Chapter 1199. In this expedition to Blackwing's nest, Xueqi had been very low-key. There were only 10 people in the team, and they were not short of saying to Nefarian, "Come on, let's fight one-on-one." Of course, although they were few in number, their quality was definitely not low. Warriors: Magni, Kain and Grom. Paladins: Gavin, Rad and Tyrion. Mages: Xueqi and Alucia. Rangers: Vanessa. Rogues: Vanessa. Priests: Kalia. Excluding these guys, there were a total of 4 people with divine weapons. Just by looking at the number, it was definitely a third of the team that had attacked the Molten Core. Who would have thought that this arrogant black dragon who always had his tail in the sky would be so cowardly? Perhaps it was because Duke had killed his father, beat up his sister, slept with his sister, and even became his mount. Nefarian wasn't just a normal coward, but a super coward. If the Molten Core was only a few times bigger than what Xueqi remembered, the map was still the same. Then Blackwing's nest would definitely change beyond recognition. Originally, entering Blackwing's nest should have been through a short passageway, directly arriving in front of the wild Razorgore, a group of people playing a game of death with a bunch of messy dragons.
Well, as soon as Xueqi entered the door, he shouted, "Holy shit!"
Because they seemed to have fallen into the Greek myth, the Minotaur's Labyrinth in Crete. It was a labyrinth with 9 floors and an area of more than 1,000,000 square meters. The walls of the labyrinth were very rare, and had spatial attributes. Even with Xueqi's divine weapons, they could not directly destroy it.
Actually, it was not that they could not destroy it, but the price of doing so was that Xueqi and the others could very likely fall into the void.
In the end, they could only obediently use their 2 legs to walk. Fortunately, the labyrinth itself could not move, and there really was an exit. After Xueqi used the system to record all the routes they had taken to ensure that they would not go back, walking out of the labyrinth became a matter of time. Even so, Xueqi and the others spent a month to walk out of this labyrinth. Then, he ran into Nefarian's first scheme. Razorgore was a huge dragonborn. He had the typical lizard lower body of a dragonborn and the upper body of a human. However, he carried a ridiculous red war flag on his back. He looked like a target and was just short of shouting "Fire at me" at everyone. His appearance attracted the gazes of Magni and the rest. After holding back for an entire month, those stubborn warriors were practically the first to rush up and prepare to fight the big boss. Everyone knew that the first boss of Blackwing's nest, Wild Razorgore, definitely couldn't be killed right from the start. The result of directly killing Razorgore was that these dragon eggs would explode into a mushroom cloud like a nuclear bomb. Xueqi could activate Ice Barrier to block it, but the others could only practice the Lying Dead Sword technique. The only way to solve this problem was to control a special controller on a high platform. Through it, they could temporarily control Razorgore to dismantle all the dragon eggs. Seeing that the 3 warriors had almost reached the charging distance, Xueqi's face darkened. He could only suddenly shout like a charlatan, "Wait! We can't kill that guy now. Do you see the flag on his back?
It says in Draconic, "After this battle, we'll go back home to get married."
That's clearly a cursed flag of certain death. Don't kill him first. Anyone who kills him will have to die with him.
Ignoring the fact that the 3 warriors who were born with low intelligence really had, "I believe him," written all over their faces.
So what? The other 6 felt that Xueqi was just spouting nonsense. The only thing stopping them was Xueqi's prestige. I can feel the pulse of fate. I'll control this guy to dismantle the dragon eggs. You guys deal with those guys that jump out. Xueqi couldn't care less about the boss chasing after him. He immediately flashed over to activate the controller. His mind was in a trance. The next moment, Xueqi discovered that he had become Razorgore. Then, Xueqi felt a headache coming on. If this was a game, he could dismantle the eggs by pressing a button. But what should he do here? Just as Xueqi was thinking about how to find the skill to smash eggs after he transmigrated into a dragon, a large number of orcs started jumping out from the dark corners of the hall. Wait, I need someone to drag them along. Just as Xueqi was about to say his strategy, he realized to his shock that he had underestimated this hero group. You traitors of the tribe. Cain was playing whack-a-mole. He smashed every orc he saw, turning them into minced meat. As he played whack-a-mole with the Firelord hammer, he complained, "Aren't you going to capture them and make them repent in front of your ancestors' graves? Forgiving these traitors is our ancestors' business. I'm only in charge of letting them see our ancestors." Lord Howl was furious. Every time he used Bloodroar, he would send at least 3 orcs to reincarnate. The others were equally ferocious. Gavin Rad's wind sword was, of course, powerful. With a flash of lightning, he killed a large number of orcs. In the game, the players were unable to deal with the increasing number of orc assault teams, so they had no choice but to have a warrior drag a group of monsters to run in circles. In reality, these people who wrote about heroes being butchers were too ferocious. At the very least, they could kill one with 1 arrow like Windsor. Why would they still need to pull a train? They could just clear the field. Just like that, Xueqi was able to leisurely scan Razorgore's brain, which had a very small capacity, and find the divine skill of opening dragon eggs hidden in his memory. Then, he could easily destroy all the dragon eggs on the field. After dealing with the dragon eggs, this boss was a weakling. When Xueqi announced that he could deal with this guy, the group of bastards practically swarmed him. You're stabbing the boss? What a coincidence. I'm stabbing too. How about we do it together? Sure. Let's stab together. The 4 godly weapons, Xueqi's moral integrity, Ashbringer, Firelord's hand, and Thunder's fury, continuously shone with a radiance that belonged only to them. The result of the 4 beasts attacking together was that the number 1 boss of Blackwing's nest could not last more than 10 seconds before he died. The moment the wild Razorgore died, the Blackrock orcs that had swarmed him scattered in fright. Come back. You bunch of cowards. Have you all forgotten the glory of the Blackrock tribe? Grandpa Howl flew into a rage. Seeing Razorgore fall, Xueqi let out a sigh of relief. It's fine now. We'll just kill our way through. There shouldn't be any leaders who can stop us. They're just going to die one by one. Xueqi cursed in his heart. If they could attack together, why do they have to die one by one? The next moment, the wall leading to the second boss suddenly collapsed, and 4 powerful auras surged out. Xueqi's face was stiff. Pretend I didn't say anything. Chapter 1200. The second was the fallen red dragon Veristaz. The third was the draconic beast Broodmother. The fourth was the adult black dragon Fillmore. The fifth was also the adult black dragon Ebonrock. It could be said that other than the fallen red dragon, if the other bosses came one by one, they would definitely be sent to their deaths. But if they came together it would be fun. The ancient red dragon Veristaz's movements were incomparably ferocious. A pair of scarlet claws tore through the wall in front of him as if it was a piece of paper. He was clearly using the most direct method to tell Xueqi and the others what an ancient beast was, but his mouth was muttering something that made one's heart ache. Duke Marcus. It's too late. Nefarian's power of corruption has already taken effect. I can't control myself. His hatred and anger have made me unprecedentedly powerful. Run, mortals. The anger of the Blackstone King is surging in my blood.
Please, I beg of you, run. Run before I lose my mind. The black flame is burning in my heart. I have to release him. The pitiful ancient red dragon begged Xueqi and the others to escape, but his companion did not appreciate it. The black dragon Fillmore pounced and pressed his claws on the back of Veristaz's head, laughing coldly. Idiot! Since you've fallen, you should enjoy the pleasure of falling. In the name of the great black dragon King Nefarian, go! Kill these invaders. Red-skinned slaves. Ah! Flames, death, destruction. You mortals, let Lord Nefarian's power. No, I want to fight. Alexstrasza, help me, I must fight to the end. The red dragon desperately prayed to the queen he worshipped and believed in. Unfortunately, his queen was destined to be unable to answer his call. This was because Alexstrasza was either trapped in the void battlefield in the universe, unable to leave, or she was dealing with the Silithus bug tide. Nefarian's trap and the whispers of the ancient god Enzos were a terrifying combination that easily exceeded the limits of his willpower. Veristaz, who was crying dragon tears and uttering the most unbearable words of repentance, pounced on Roland. On the other side, Magni, Grom, and Cain shouted the same name, Xueqi. The more dangerous the situation was, the more they needed a clear order and a unified will. At times like this, even the wrong order was 10,000 times better than doing nothing. Xueqi's expression was firm and his gaze was firm. Every word he said was like a lighthouse in the dark sky, guiding everyone's heart. Old Bull Dragon Beast, Shorty Double Flight, Gavin Red Dragon, focus fire with me. There were only 10 people, yet they had to face 4 bosses at once. If it were any other team, they would have already chosen to bow their heads to fate and await death in despair and fear. They, on the other hand, had gone through so many trials and tribulations along the way. When had they not faced terrifying existences that transcended the mortal world as mere mortals? The Lich King, Archimonde, Ragnaros. He wrote his will again and again, but every time he came back, he would throw it into the waste paper basket with a bitter smile. Looking back, he felt a sense of relief in his heart. A true warrior dared to face the most terrifying life. In the face of evil, someone had to stand up. Since fate had chosen him, then he would use the brightest smile to face the darkest and most hopeless situation. As long as he believed in Xueqi, he might once again be able to turn the enemy into ashes in the blink of an eye. Ha 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 ha. Who was laughing so boldly? Ha 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 ha. Who was it that was facing a tragic death? At this moment where time seemed to stop, everyone in the team suddenly let go of everything. No race, no gender, no occupation. Come on. Let's hurt each other. Let your Grandpa Bull teach you what it means to fight. Cain charged forward violently, crashing straight into the dragon leader, Broodmother Leroy. The 2 huge humanoid creatures crashed into each other like Mars crashing into Earth. This was a clash of strength against strength. This was the purest form of violence between males. The moment the 2 of them crashed into each other, there was a muffled sound like an earthquake. The next moment, both of their feet sank deep into the solid ground. Their muscles swelled, and their veins popped. In just a short second, they had fought countless rounds. Shifting his center of gravity, turning his hand to capture. In the end, Old Bull's technique was better. With a swift twist of his wrist, he grabbed Broodmother Leroy's neck, and then pushed the dragon leader to the exit of the labyrinth like a bulldozer. Gravel flew everywhere, and he pushed the dragon leader to the exit of the labyrinth in one breath. That shorty, Magni, was even more awesome. Not only did he use Deity's Descent, he seized the opportunity when the 2 adult black dragons were trying to pass through the hole that Veristaz had created and immediately charged over with charge. It had to be said that the Dwarf King's ability to grasp the right timing was impeccable. It should have been 3 giant dragons rushing in one after another into the hall where first boss Razorgar was, but the Dwarf King had let Valestras in, and then moved to block the opening that wasn't too big. A normal powerhouse wouldn't be able to become a door god, but the enlarged Magni was the size of a 1-story house. He used his height and width to block in front of the 2 black dragons. If it was someone else, the 2 black dragons would probably have broken through. But Magni was wielding the famous flaming demon hammer. Breaking through meant that they would have to engage in close combat with Magni. Facing that divine hammer that stood at the pinnacle of the fire element, Firemo and Ebonrock were afraid. They decisively unleashed their dragon's breath at Magni. Who knew? God's descent.
was the most impudent move. In this state, the Dwarf King was practically immune to magic. In addition to the fire resistance that the flaming demon hammer gave him, before the effect of God's descent ended, even a god wouldn't be able to burn him easily. The darned shorty was smug. Come on. Continue acting. Do you want to come and fight with me? Magni almost made the lungs of the two black dragons explode from anger. But so what? Before Magni's enhanced state ended, he was undefeatable. However, everyone's focus was still on the battle between the remaining 8 people and the fallen red dragon. Velestras, the infamous fallen red dragon that had caused countless guilds to disband and left countless players with painful and unforgettable memories, was the key to the entire battle. Ha! Master Howl leaped over with a violent aura, scaring Duque so much that his eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Damn, you're a weapon warrior. How can you tank a boss? The next moment, Gavin Rad's sword slashed over, and it was as if a storm had been stirred up. The powerful nature attribute damage easily attracted the red dragon's attention. Remember, little red dragon, the person who killed you is called Gavin Rad. Chapter 1201. Duque bared his teeth. In the past, Gavin Rad was a good young man who knew his place. When he was Duque's bodyguard, he stood guard at the door and didn't ask questions that he shouldn't ask. If anyone dared to come, he would block them. But now that he had a divine artifact sword, the sea, they were all F*King wild. At least that was what it looked like. If Magni and Cain walked the path of absolute violence, Gavin Rad was more of the technical type. Most of the divine artifacts that appeared in the world were huge weapons. Just the weight alone made Duque want to die. Although Thunder Fury, Blessed Sword of the Windseeker, wasn't as exaggerated as Ashbringer, it was definitely a two-handed sword that normal people couldn't hold with one hand. But Gavin Rad could swing the wind sword like a windmill. Left and right. Because he swung it so fast, it looked like he was swinging a huge whip instead of a lightning sword that looked like a fork. Zap 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 zap. The terrifying sound of wind breaking rang in everyone's ears. Zap 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 zap. It sounded like thousands of lightning snakes dancing in the air. The sound of wind and thunder filled everyone's ears. No one noticed that a faint red aura permeated the surroundings. That was Veristas, Red Dragon Essence. An ancient red dragon that sought self-destruction after his fall was using this method to nourish his enemies. His mind was in a mess, but his heart still yearned for the light. He still tried to help these invaders as much as he could. He attacked every mortal in a frenzy, but he also hoped that this small team of mortals could really create a miracle and end his fall, even if it meant the end of his life. Whoosh! Another circle of scorching flames spread on the red dragon's huge body. If someone had a weak resistance to fire, they would probably have been burnt to a crisp in that instant. Duque raised his hand, and a wall of fire suddenly blocked the red dragon's flaming nova. He absorbed the red dragon's flames at a higher temperature. However, Veristas was not scary because of the itchy flames, but because of combustion stimulation. Ah! Kalia suddenly discovered that her entire body was bathed in flames. This flame did not burn her body. Instead, it stimulated her, and a strong sense of excitement rose in her chest. She suddenly discovered that not only did she have an almost inexhaustible amount of magic power under the nourishment of the red dragon essence, but all her healing spells that required casting time were now instantaneous, as if she had learned all the metamagic abilities in this area in an instant. Duque! Focus on healing for 15 seconds, then leave it to me. Kalia realized that Duque's face was actually dark. Of course, Duque was worried. Because in the original history, all the people who were hit by burn stimulation could first deal crazy damage for 15 seconds, and then no more than 20 seconds at most, the excess red dragon magic in the body would exceed the limit that the human body could bear, directly causing the person to explode and die. Not only would the person under the spell die, but they could also blow up their teammates when they self-destructed. If he had not snatched the divinity of Ragnaros, Duque would not have fought with the fallen Veristas like this. Perhaps he would have taken a gamble and let Onyxia and the red dragon fight each other. But firstly, Duque always felt that Nefarian would do something bad to Onyxia. Secondly, after snatching the divinity of fire, Duque had a deeper understanding of his own magic control. If Duque's control of flames before was limited to every single flame, Then now that Duque had the divinity of fire, his control could even be refined down to every single molecule, and adjust the direction of each high-energy pulse. Kalia cast spells nervously, but the feeling of terror and unease of having a ticking time bomb in her body filled her heart. She could still cast spells without any disorder purely because she had absolute trust in Duque. If Brother Duque said to leave it to him, then leave it to him. If it weren't for him, I would have been a dead person 15 years ago. For some reason, at times like this, it was easier to recall the past. Kalia suddenly thought of the ice rose that Duque had given her, of Duque's grand marriage kidnapping, of the 10 years of freedom that he had given her, and of, at some point, Kalia's eyes were already filled with tears, and they almost burst out. Duque, I really have never regretted it. Ha! Duque did not have the time to care about Kalia's maiden heart. A pair of fiery big hands were directly placed on Kalia's back. He was using his superior elemental control to control Kalia's magic circuits with a half-hearted effort. Where is it? Duque firmly believed that there would not be a self-destruction for no reason. Whether it was red dragon essence, or combustion stimulation, it must have been Veristas using some form of influence on the human body, and in the end, it overloaded the human body and caused the tragedy. Duque scanned Kalia's body in various ways and from various angles at a frequency of 100 times per second. Kalia felt a strong sense of shame for no reason. It was not just like a pure girl suddenly being viciously violated by a hooligan. It was more like selling her body and soul on a deeper level. Kalia's entire body trembled, but she still did not resist. She stopped casting spells and leaned back almost backwards, relying on the support of Duque's hands to keep her standing. What was the key? Large beads of sweat seeped out of Duque's forehead. Suddenly, Duque had a discovery. Ha! Duque scolded softly. He pushed with all his might, almost causing Kalia to fall forward. But the effect was obvious. Everyone could see that between Kalia's white breasts, a fireball the size of a baby's fist seeped out as if it was seeping blood, and suddenly shot out. Bang! There was a loud sound. It was a terrifying explosion caused by the purest fire elements accumulating. Damn it! The concentration of fire elements is too high, causing the human body to become a large fire elemental door? Duque muttered. At this moment, Kalia was in Duque's arms in a standard princess carry position, panting heavily. She knew her own body best. It was obvious that she had been hovering at the gates of hell just now, and it was purely Duque who had pulled her back. Duque! I believe in you, oh. Forever, Karia said with a smile. Suddenly, Gavinrad screamed. Boss! I've been hit by that thing too? Do I have to be carried by you in a princess hug to survive? 18 seconds later, Duque kicked Gavinrad flat on his face, and then a ball of fire jumped out and exploded. You're tuning into the Xueqi Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.